Prologue. The echo in the chapel. The first thing you notice about the Cliff House Rehabilitation Center isn't the wind, but the silence underneath it. The ocean was a given, a constant percussion of waves against jagged rocks far below, the kind of sound that should have been soothing but instead felt like nature counting down to something inevitable. The seabirds cried out in patterns that seemed almost linguistic, as if they were gossiping about the damaged souls housed in these stone walls. The creak of old wood, the whisper of salt-corroded hinges, the occasional clang of radiator pipes in a building that had once been a monastery and never quite forgotten its origins. That was the surface. But beneath it all, in the spaces between the wind gusts, was a different kind of quiet. It was the silence of broken minds trying to heal, of pharmaceutical cocktails dulling edges that used to be sharp enough to cut, of secrets that therapists knew better than to voice aloud. I moved through it all like a ghost. White coat pristine over dark slacks. Leather messenger bag worn soft from years of carrying other people's traumas. A lanyard with my ID badge that read Dr. Asha Nolan, clinical psychologist, though most of the staff just called me Dr. Nolan and the patients didn't call me anything at all until I'd earned their trust. For the last 7 years, this wind-battered fortress had been my refuge and my penance. I treated PTSD survivors who flinched at shadows, depression patients who smiled while planning their final exits, anxiety disorders that manifested as physical pain no medication could touch. I was trained to see the broken places in people, to map the fault lines in their psyches, to help them rebuild from the fragments they'd become. But I had never been taught how to treat myself. My father had tried to warn me before he died. Before the scandal. Before everything. You can't save everyone, Asha. Some people are too broken. Some fires burn too hot to get close to. Tonight, the silence felt different. Urgent, like the moment before lightning strikes and you can taste the electricity in the air. It started with a phone call at 11:47 p.m. I was in my quarters, the converted rectory on the 3rd floor that came with a position, reviewing case files and trying not to think about Emma. 5 years today since the fire. 5 years since the clinical trial that was supposed to help her anxiety disorder had instead sent her into psychotic episodes that culminated in her walking into that research lab and my phone shattered the quiet. The director's number. Dr. Marcus Reed didn't call after hours unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. Dr. Nolan. His voice was tight with the kind of controlled panic that comes from decades of emergency room experience. I need you in the West Wing. We have a new admission. He was found unconscious near the cliffs about an hour ago. Coast Guard brought him in. Overdose. I was already standing, reaching for my coat. Unknown. No wallet, no ID. But Asha. He paused, and in that pause I heard something I'd never heard from Marcus before. Fear. He's been asking for you. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. What? The moment he regained consciousness. Before we even told him where he was. He opened his eyes and said your name. Marcus's voice dropped lower. He said, "Tell Dr. Asha Nolan I remember. Tell her I remember the fire." The world narrowed to the sound of my own heartbeat. No one here knew about Emma. I'd buried that part of my past so deep I'd almost convinced myself it had happened to someone else. A different Asha, in a different life, before trauma psychology became less of a career choice and more of an act of atonement. I'm on my way. I hung up before he could hear the tremor in my voice. The West Wing was the oldest part of the facility. Original monastery architecture from 1892. All stone walls and vaulted ceilings and the kind of drafty windows that no amount of modern renovation could fix. We used it for high-risk patients, the ones who needed isolation for their own safety or everyone else's. The walk from my quarters took 3 minutes that felt like 30. The hallway lights flickered as I approached room 7. The nurse station was empty. Deliberately, I suspected. Whatever this was, Marcus wanted privacy for it. I found him outside the patient's room, clipboard in hand. His usually composed features tight with tension. "Tell me," I said without preamble. Marcus handed me the clipboard. Male, approximately 35 to 40 years old. 6'2", 185 pounds. Well-nourished, expensive dental work, recent manicure. No obvious signs of chronic drug use, though tox screens are still pending. He was found in formal evening wear. A Tom Ford suit, according to Detective Chen who brought him in. No wallet, no phone, no identification of any kind. But you know who he is. It wasn't a question. I could see it in Marcus's eyes. He nodded slowly. I didn't recognize him immediately. It's been years since his face was all over the news, and he's older, thinner. The haircut's different. But once I compared him to archived photos. He pulled out his tablet, navigated to a news article dated 5 years ago. The headline hit me like a physical blow. Voss pharmaceutical empire collapses. Founder Julian Voss vanishes amid clinical trial scandal. The photo showed a man in his early 30s, sharp-featured, dark-eyed, with a kind of privileged handsomeness that came from good genes and better orthodontia. He wore a navy suit and a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes as he left a courthouse, one hand raised to ward off photographers. I knew that face. God help me, I knew it. The trial that killed my sister. My voice came out flat, emotionless. Years of professional training keeping the scream locked inside my chest. The anxiety medication trial. Voss Pharmaceuticals was the parent company. Asha. Marcus reached out, then thought better of it. You don't have to do this. I can bring in Dr. Chen from Stanford, she specializes in. No. The word came out harder than I intended. If he asked for me specifically, there's a reason. I need to know what he knows. What he remembers. Are you sure that's wise? Given your history. I met his eyes. Wisdom has nothing to do with it. Marcus studied me for a long moment, the way he used to study incoming trauma cases, looking for the invisible cracks that would spread under pressure. Finally he nodded. I'll be at the nurse station if you need me. We have security on standby. You think he's dangerous. I think anyone connected to a pharmaceutical scandal that destroyed lives is dangerous. Even if they're the victim. He handed me the clipboard. All the information we have so far is in there. His vitals are stable. Neurochecks normal. Physically he's fine. Mentally. He shrugged. That's why you're here. I took the clipboard, my hand steadier than I felt. Has he said anything else? Beyond my name. Just one other thing. Marcus's expression darkened. When Detective Chan asked him what he was doing on the cliffs, he said, waiting for the ghosts to find me. Temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus left. His footsteps echoing down the stone corridor until they faded into the ever-present wind noise. I stood outside room 7, staring at the brushed steel door, trying to calm my racing heart. Professional distance, Asha. You're a clinician. He's a patient. Whatever happened 5 years ago, whatever role he played in Emma's death, right now he's just another broken mind that needs treatment. But even as I thought it, I knew it was a lie. I pushed open the door. The room was dim, lit only by the small lamp on the bedside table and the ghostly glow of the monitoring equipment. The window looked out onto darkness. Beyond the glass, I could hear the ocean's endless commentary, waves against rocks, nature's white noise machine. He sat in the chair by the window rather than the bed, a blanket draped across his shoulders, his profile sharp against the faint light. He'd been handsome in the photos from 5 years ago, but time and whatever he'd been through had refined those features into something more striking, more severe. His dark hair was longer now, threaded with premature silver at the temples. His jaw was sharper, cheekbones more prominent, as if something had burned away everything soft and left only the essential structure. When he turned to look at me, I understood why Marcus had called security. His eyes were the color of smoke in shadow, deep gray, almost black in this light. They held the kind of intelligence that made you feel simultaneously seen and dissected, as if he could map every defense mechanism you'd ever built and knew exactly which pressure points would make them crumble. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched taut as a wire, vibrating with everything we weren't saying. Then he smiled. It was a terrible smile, beautiful and ruined like a cathedral after a fire. Dr. Nolan. His voice was deeper than I expected, cultured and precise despite whatever he'd been through. I was beginning to think you wouldn't come. You asked for me. I kept my voice level, professional, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. I'm here to assess your condition. Can you tell me your name? You already know my name. He tilted his head, studying me with that unnerving intensity. And I know yours. Asha Catherine Nolan, born March 14th. Graduated Stanford with honors. Lost your mother to breast cancer when you were 12. Lost your sister to a clinical trial gone wrong when you were 27. He paused. Lost your faith in pharmaceutical companies shortly thereafter. I spread through my veins. How do you know all that? Because I've been looking for you for 5 years. He stood, letting the blanket fall, and I could see he was still wearing the dress shirt from the Tom Ford suit, rumpled and salt-stained. I've been to 12 different facilities, checked staff rosters at every trauma psychology clinic on the West Coast, following breadcrumbs and rumors. And 3 months ago, I finally found you. So you came here. I took an involuntary step back. You engineered this admission. Not exactly. The unconscious part wasn't planned. I miscalculated the dosage of benzodiazepines needed to mimic an overdose without actually damaging myself. But yes, I came here deliberately. I've been watching this facility for weeks, waiting for the right moment to get inside. He moved closer, and I forced myself to hold my ground. I needed to talk to you. To tell you what really happened the night your sister died. I know what happened. The trial was approved using falsified data. The medication caused acute psychotic episodes in susceptible patients. Emma walked into the research lab during one of those episodes and my voice cracked. I couldn't say it. Couldn't describe how they'd found her. And set the fire that killed 6 people and destroyed 2 years of research. Julian finished for me. His voice gentle in a way that made me want to hit him. I know. I was there. The room tilted. I grabbed the back of the patient chair to steady myself. What? I was in the building that night. In my office on the 4th floor when the alarm started. I made it to the 2nd floor, to the lab, before the smoke got too thick. He was close enough now that I could see the faint scarring on his hands, old burns that had healed poorly. I tried to get her out. I tried to reach her, but the fire doors had jammed and... He stopped, something flickering across his face. Pain. Real raw pain. I couldn't save her. I'm sorry. I stared at him, my entire worldview fracturing like glass. The reports never mentioned you being there. The investigation said the building was empty except for Emma and the night security guard who died trying to contain the fire. The reports were incomplete. Deliberately so. His jaw tightened. There were things about that trial, about what was really being tested, that certain people wanted buried. When the fire destroyed the lab and killed the witnesses, it became convenient to let the official story stand. Tragic accident. Psychotic patient. Building code violations. End of investigation. And you just... let them. Let the world think Emma was some kind of monster who killed people. I let them think I was the monster. He said it so quietly I almost missed it. I let them blame me. Let them say I cut corners, used falsified data, prioritized profit over safety. I destroyed my own reputation, bankrupted my company, and disappeared before they could arrest me. Because if I stayed, if I told the truth about what was really happening in that trial, more people would die. That's insane. But even as I said it, pieces were clicking together. The way the investigation had closed so quickly. The settlements paid out to families without trial. The odd gaps in the official report. What was really happening? That's why I'm here. Julian reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and touched my wrist. His fingers were cold, but his thumb found my pulse with unsettling precision. I need to tell you the truth, Dr. Nolan. All of it. What your sister was really volunteering for. What your father knew. What I tried to stop. His eyes held mine, smoke and shadow and something that looked terrifyingly like hope. But first, I need you to answer one question. What question? His thumb pressed against my racing pulse, counting each beat like he was memorizing it. Do you remember being in the lab that night? Do you remember the fire? The question hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't there. I was at a conference in Seattle when it happened. I didn't even know anything was wrong until hospital called me 20 hours later to identify. I couldn't finish that sentence either. That's what you remember. His grip on my wrist tightened fractionally. But memory is fragile, Dr. Nolan. Especially traumatic memory. Especially memory that's been edited. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that there's surveillance footage from that night. Footage that was never entered into evidence. Footage that shows you in that building, walking into the restricted lab area with your sister at 11:43 p.m. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Footage that shows you leading her inside. The room swam. I tried to pull away, but his grip held firm. Not painful but absolute. That's impossible. I was in Seattle. I have receipts, hotel records, flight confirmations. You do, he agreed. Because someone went to great lengths to create those records. To make sure you had an airtight alibi. To make sure you'd never question where you really were that night. He leaned closer, and I could smell salt and smoke and something darker, like cedar burned to ash. Tell me something, Dr. Nolan. Do you dream about fire? I did. God help me, I did. Every night for 5 years the same dream. Emma's face through flames. My hands reaching but never touching. The smell of burning hair and melting plastic and something sweet and chemical that I could never identify. That's just trauma, I whispered. Survivor's guilt. Manifestation of grief. Is it? His eyes searched mine. Or is it memory trying to surface? Truth your mind buried because it was too terrible to face. You're lying. But my voice lacked conviction. This is some kind of manipulation, I'm confessing. He released my wrist finally, but the absence of his touch felt like its own kind of violence. I came here to confess what I did. What we both did. What was done to you. He stepped back, giving me space to breathe, though the air felt thin and useless. And to warn you because they're not finished yet. The people who programmed you. People who used your sister. They're starting again, and you're the only person who knows enough to stop them. Programmed. The word tasted absurd. This is insane. You're delusional. This whole. Then why did you come when I called for you? He tilted his head, watching me with that terrible knowing gaze. Why didn't you refuse the case? Why didn't you let Dr. Reed bring in someone else? You came because some part of you knows. Some part of you remembers. He moved back to the window, becoming a silhouette against the darkness and the distant lighthouse beam that swept across the water every 30 seconds. You came because you've been looking for me too, even if you don't remember why. I should have left. Should have called security, marked him as delusional, recommended a psychiatric hold and psychotropic medication. But I didn't move. Couldn't move. Because he was right about one thing. I had come. Had walked into this room knowing who he was, what he represented. All the reasons I should stay away. And I'd come anyway. The surveillance footage, I heard myself say. Do you have it? Not here. But I can get it. I can show you everything. He turned back to face me, and the lighthouse beam caught his features for just a moment. Sharp and haunted and so certain it hurt to look at. But once you see it, Dr. Nolan, you can't unsee it. Once you know the truth, you'll be in danger. The same kind of danger your sister was in. The kind of danger I've been running from for 5 years. Then why tell me? Why drag me into this? Because you were already in it. You just didn't remember. His voice went soft, almost tender. And because if we're going to stop them from doing to others what they did to Emma, what they did to you, I need your help. I need someone who understands psychological conditioning, memory manipulation, pharmaceutical mind control. I need someone who has every reason to want the truth. He paused. I need someone who loved Emma enough to burn the world down for her. The lighthouse beam swept across us again. In that flash of light, I saw something in his face that terrified me more than anything else he'd said. Recognition. Like he was looking at someone he knew intimately, had known for years, was seeing again after a long absence. You don't know me, I said, but it sounded weak even to my own ears. I don't know the woman you've become. He acknowledged. The Dr. Nolan who treats PTSD and depression, who keeps professional distance, who spent 5 years hiding behind white coats and clinical terminology. But I know the Asha who walked into fire. The Asha who screamed her sister's name while the building burned. The Asha who they had to sedate and reprogram because she saw too much. His expression shifted into something unbearably sad. I know the ghost. And I'm here to tell her she's not dead yet. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old window frames. The ocean's percussion grew louder, more insistent. And beneath it all, that same careful silence, the sound of broken things trying not to shatter completely. I looked at this man, this stranger who knew things about me I didn't know about myself, who claimed to be my enemy and my confessor in the same breath, and made a decision that felt both inevitable and insane. Tomorrow, I said quietly. 9 a.m. My office. You're going to tell me everything. And you're going to show me that footage. And then I'll decide whether you're telling the truth or whether you need to be in a psychiatric facility for the rest of your life. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope maybe. Or relief. And if I am telling the truth, I thought about Emma. About the dreams that had haunted me for 5 years. About the gaps in my memory I'd explained away as trauma but had never quite believed. About the feeling I'd had since the moment I walked into this room. That I'd been here before, had this conversation before, in some other life where I'd made different choices. If you're telling the truth, I said, my voice steady despite the way my hands were shaking, then I'll burn down whoever did this to her. Plus, I'll destroy them the same way they destroyed my sister. Julian Voss smiled again, and this time it reached his eyes, terrible and beautiful and achingly sad. Good, he said. Because that's exactly what I've been waiting 5 years to hear. I left him there, silhouetted against the window and the darkness and the relentless ocean. Walked back down the stone corridor with its flickering lights and medieval bones. Made it to my quarters before my legs gave out, before the professional mask cracked, before the scream I'd been holding back finally tore free. Marcus was right. Wisdom had nothing to do with this. This was about ghosts and fire and truth. This was about memory and madness and the terrible space where they intersected. This was about the moment before lightning strikes, when you can taste electricity in the air and absolutely know that everything is about to burn. I sat on my bed, trembling, and pulled out the one photo I had of Emma. Taken 2 months before she'd volunteered for the trial. She was laughing, head thrown back, sunlight turning her hair to gold. So alive. So whole. So sure she could be helped. I'm sorry, I whispered to her frozen face. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. But even as I said it, another voice whispered in the back of my mind. A voice that sounded like Julian Voss and like truth and like madness. What if you didn't fail to save her? What if you never had the chance to try? I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my window and watched the lighthouse beam sweep across the water every 30 seconds. 1, 2, 3 marking time until 9 a.m. when I would learn what I'd done. What I'd forgotten. What I might still become. The wolf had called me a ghost. But ghosts remembered how they died. And I was starting to remember something worse. How I'd lived. Chapter 1. The House That Watches. I made it through morning rounds on autopilot and 3 cups of coffee that tasted like ash. The facility operated on routines older than most of its patients. Breakfast at 7, group therapy at 8, individual sessions starting at 9. I moved through the schedule with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before, nodding at the right moments, making notes in margins, maintaining the careful professional distance that kept me safe. But my hands shook every time I wrote something down. And I couldn't stop checking my watch. 8:47 a.m. Dr. Patricia Chen, our anxiety specialist, caught me in the hallway outside the group therapy room. She was in her mid-50s, with steel gray hair cut short and the kind of sharp-eyed intelligence that missed nothing. "You look like hell, Asha." Not a question. An observation delivered with her characteristic bluntness. "Didn't sleep well. The new admission in 7. She studied my face with clinical precision. "Marcus told me you took the case. He also told me who the patient is." He paused. "That was a mistake." "Probably." I adjusted the strap of my messenger bag, a nervous habit I'd never quite broken. "But it's done now." "It's not done. You can still transfer him to me. God knows I've handled enough narcissistic personalities with martyr complexes to add one more to my roster." Her expression softened slightly. "You don't owe him anything, Asha. You don't owe him your professional expertise. And you certainly don't owe him your peace of mind. You don't know what I owe him. I don't even know what I owe him." "He specifically asked for me," I said instead. "There's a reason. I need to know what it is." Patricia's mouth tightened. "Just remember, men like Julian Voss are experts at manipulation. They don't confess because they want absolution. They confess because they want control. Don't give him yours." She walked away before I could respond, leaving me alone in a hallway that suddenly felt too narrow, too close. The old monastery walls seemed to press inward, and for a disorienting moment I could smell smoke. Not real smoke, just the ghost of it, the kind that lived in my sinuses after 5 years of nightmares. 8:52 a.m. My office was on the second floor, in what had once been the monastery's library. High ceilings with exposed beams. A wall of original built-in bookshelves that I'd filled with psychiatric texts, case studies, and a collection of first editions on trauma psychology that I'd been accumulating since grad school. My desk faced the window, a calculated choice that let me see the ocean while patients sat with their backs to it, giving them privacy from the vastness while I could use it to stay grounded. The room smelled like old books and lavender oil from the diffuser I kept running. Calming sense. Professional environment. Everything designed to put people at ease. But I wasn't at ease. I was standing at my window, watching the path from the west wing, waiting for him to appear. 8:58 a.m. When the knock finally came, precise, unhurried 3 measured raps, my heart lurched into my throat. "Come in." The door opened, and Julian Voss walked into my sanctuary. He looked different in daylight, more solid somehow. They'd given him facility clothes. Dark gray scrubs that somehow looked expensive on his frame, probably because of the way he carried himself, like the clothes were incidental to the power they contained. His hair was still damp from a shower, combed back from his face in a way that emphasized the sharp architecture of his features. The burns on his hands were more visible now. Old scars that webbed across his knuckles and disappeared under his sleeves, suggesting the damage went deeper than what showed. But it was his eyes that pinned me in place. Gray smoke in morning light, focused on me with that same unnerving intensity from last night. Like he was cataloging every micro-expression, every defensive posture, every tell I didn't know I was broadcasting. "Dr. Nolan." He closed the door behind him with careful precision. "Thank you for seeing me. Sit." I gestured to the leather chair across from my desk, forcing my voice into clinical neutrality. "We have an hour. You said you wanted to tell me everything." "I said I needed to tell you everything. There's a difference." But he sat, settling into the chair with the controlled grace of someone who'd spent time learning to move through the world like a threat. Want implies choice. Need implies survival. I took my own seat, putting the desk between us, a barrier that felt both necessary and insufficient. "Let's start with the basics. Your full name, age, why you're here. You already know who I am. Humor me. For the record." I pulled out a fresh intake form, clicking my pen with more force than necessary. "This is an official evaluation. I need documentation." A slight smile ghosted across his lips. "Julian Alexander Voss, 38 years old. Currently here because I orchestrated a fake medical emergency to gain access to a secure facility and speak with a psychologist who's been avoiding me for 5 years. I wrote it down exactly as he'd said it, my handwriting tight and controlled. Occupation: former CEO of Voss Pharmaceuticals. Current occupation: fugitive, ghost, penitent. He tilted his head. Take your pick. Mental health history: clean until 5 years ago. Depression following the scandal. Treated with SSRIs for approximately 8 months before I stopped taking them. No hospitalizations. No suicide attempts, though I'd be lying if I said I hadn't considered it. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. PTSD from the fire. Nightmares, hypervigilance, avoidance behaviors. The usual constellation. I forced myself to keep writing, even as his words scraped against my own identical symptoms. Current medications: none. I don't trust pharmaceuticals anymore. The irony in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Funny, considering I built my fortune creating them. Substance use: alcohol socially before. Nothing now. The benzodiazepines I used yesterday were a means to an end, not recreational. He leaned forward slightly. Can we dispense with the intake checklist? You're stalling and we both know it. I set down my pen with deliberate care. Fine. Tell me about the fire. For the first time since he'd walked in, something flickered behind his carefully controlled expression. Pain, sharp and immediate, before he locked it down again. Which version do you want? The official story or the truth? Both. Let's start with what the investigation concluded. He nodded slowly, as if organizing his thoughts. When he spoke, his voice took on a formal quality, like he was reciting testimony he'd given 1,000 times in his head. The official story. On November 7, 5 years ago, a clinical trial subject named Asha Nolan experienced an acute psychotic episode while visiting the Voss Pharmaceuticals research facility in San Francisco. She gained access to the second-floor laboratory through a door that should have been secured but wasn't. Building code violation number 1. Once inside, she either deliberately or accidentally ignited flammable materials. The investigation was inconclusive on intent. The fire spread rapidly due to improper storage of chemical compounds. Violation number 2. The sprinkler system failed. Violation 3. 6 people died. Emma, 2 lab technicians working late, 1 security guard, 1 cleaning staff member, and 1 unidentified individual whose remains were too badly burned for DNA identification. The clinical recitation made Emma sound like a case study instead of a person. Made her death sound inevitable instead of preventable. I dug my nails into my palms under the desk, using the pain to stay focused. And the truth. Julian's jaw tightened. The truth is that Emma didn't have a psychotic episode. She was brought to the facility deliberately, during a scheduled appointment that wasn't on any official record. She came with someone she trusted, someone who'd told her there was a new treatment protocol, a breakthrough that could finally help her anxiety disorder. He paused. She came with you. The words hit like a physical blow, but I forced myself to stay still, stay clinical. I was in Seattle. I have hotel records, credit card receipts. You have fabricated records created by people with access to reservation systems and financial databases. It's not hard to manufacture an alibi when you have the right resources and motivation. He pulled something from his pocket, a small USB drive, black and unmarked. He set it on my desk between us. This contains copies of everything. Surveillance footage, medical records, financial transactions. All the evidence that was conveniently lost or sealed after the investigation closed. I stared at the drive like it was a loaded gun. Why would anyone go to that much trouble? Why would they need to give me a false alibi if I wasn't there? Because you were there. And you saw something you weren't supposed to see. Something that threatened a program worth hundreds of millions in black budget funding. He leaned back, his expression going distant. Your sister wasn't part of a clinical trial for anxiety medication, Asha. She was part of a memory modification program. Experimental protocols for treating PTSD in military personnel by selectively editing traumatic memories. The anxiety medication was just the cover story. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of my desk. That's insane. Memory modification is theoretical. The technology doesn't exist. It does. I helped develop it. His voice went quiet, heavy with something that sounded like shame. 3 years of research, funded through a Department of Defense black budget program. The goal was to help soldiers suffering from severe PTSD by allowing them to retain combat skills while suppressing the traumatic memories that caused psychological damage. It worked. Better than anyone expected. Better than it should have. You're saying you can just erase memories? Rewrite someone's past. Not erase. Modify. Suppress. Replace with constructed alternatives that feel real because they're built on authentic emotional frameworks. He leaned forward again, his intensity burning through the space between us. It's not perfect. The original memories don't disappear completely. They become like dreams, fragmented and unreliable. That's why you still have nightmares about fire. Your subconscious remembers what your conscious mind was programmed to forget. I shook my head, but the motion felt sluggish, disconnected. Even if this is true, even if this technology exists, why Emma? She wasn't military. She was a grad student with an anxiety disorder. Because the program needed to expand testing beyond combat veterans. They needed to know if it worked on different types of trauma, different psychological profiles. Emma volunteered because she was desperate, because traditional treatments weren't helping, because someone she trusted told her this could save her life. His hands clenched on the armrests. That someone was your father. The world stopped. No. The word came out strangled. My father would never. He was a research ethics consultant. His entire career was built on protecting trial subjects from unethical experiments. No. That's what made him the perfect cover. Julian's voice was gentle now, which somehow made it worse. Dr. David Nolan, renowned ethicist, vouching for a program made it seem legitimate. His name on the paperwork meant other ethics boards rubber-stamped approvals without looking too closely. He didn't know what he was really endorsing. By the time he figured it out, Emma was already enrolled. My father. Dead for 3 years now. Heart attack sudden and massive in his office at Stanford. I'd found him slumped over his desk, still holding a pen like he'd died mid-sentence. When did he figure it out? My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from somewhere outside my body. 6 months before Emma died. He confronted the program directors, threatened to go public. They convinced him to wait, told him they were shutting down the trial, that they just needed time to transition the subjects back to conventional treatment safely. Julian's expression darkened. He believed them. He shouldn't have. What happened to him? But I already knew. Already felt the shape of it forming in the space between his words. The heart attack was induced. Potassium chloride injection. Untraceable if you know what you're doing. They made it look natural. He said it without inflection, just cold fact. I have medical records showing discrepancies in his autopsy that were never followed up. I have emails he sent me 3 days before he died, saying he was afraid, that he thought someone was following him. He sent you emails. You knew my father. I worked with him. He was consulting on the ethical frameworks for the memory modification program before he understood what it really was. When he tried to shut it down, I tried to help him. That's how I ended up in the building the night of the fire. Julian stood, moving to the window, putting his back to me. Your father told me he'd hidden evidence. Documents proving the program was operating outside approved parameters, that test subjects were being endangered, that the military contractors were planning to expand to civilian applications without proper oversight. He said if anything happened to him, you would know where to find it. I don't. He never told me anything about any of this. Because they got to you before he could. Julian turned back to face me, silhouetted against the morning light. The night of the fire, you weren't in Seattle. You were in San Francisco, at your father's house, searching for the evidence he'd hidden. Emma was with you. She'd been having breakthrough memories, fragments of the modification session surfacing, and she was terrified. Your father had asked me to meet you both there, to help you go public with what we knew. Then why don't I remember any of this? My voice was rising, control slipping. Why would I forget? Because someone injected you with the same compound they were testing on Emma. A massive dose, designed to suppress everything that happened that night and replace it with the Seattle alibi. He moved closer to my desk. Emma fought it. Her system was already flooded with the experimental drugs from her trial participation. Adding more destabilized her completely. She became psychotic, violent. She attacked one of the people who'd injected you, grabbed their security pass, ran to the research facility. By the time I got there, she'd already broken into the lab where they kept the protocol files. She was trying to destroy the evidence before they could use it to hurt anyone else. She set the fire. I said it numbly, pieces clicking together in a way that made terrible sense. She wasn't having a psychotic break. She was trying to save people. She was trying to save you. To destroy the records of what they'd done to you before they could use the same technique on other civilian populations. Julian's voice cracked slightly. I tried to get her out. I swear to God I tried. But she jammed the fire doors from the inside. She wanted to make sure the evidence burned completely. I made it to the lab. I could see her through the glass observation window. But I couldn't break through. The fire doors are designed to withstand. He stopped, his hand moving unconsciously to his scarred knuckles. I destroyed my hands trying to break the glass. I breathed in so much smoke they had to intubate me. And I still couldn't save her. I stared at this man, this stranger who was describing my sister's last moments with a kind of visceral detail that could only come from being there, from trying and failing and living with that failure. Why should I believe any of this? But even as I said it, I was reaching for the USB drive. You could be delusional, confabulating, creating elaborate conspiracy theories to avoid responsibility for a pharmaceutical scandal that destroyed your company. You should believe it because you already do. He met my eyes. You came to work here, to this specific facility, to this specialty. Trauma psychology, memory disorders, PTSD treatment. You built your entire career around trying to understand what happened to Emma, even though you don't consciously remember that's what you're doing. You check your father's old office at Stanford every year on the anniversary of his death, looking for something without knowing what. You have nightmares where you smell lavender, the scent marker they used in the memory modification protocols. And you flinch every time someone mentions pharmaceutical companies, even though you tell yourself it's just lingering grief. Each word landed like a diagnosis I'd been avoiding. 'Cause he was right. All of it was right. I did check my father's office. I did have the lavender nightmares. I did feel a visceral, irrational hatred for pharmaceutical companies that went deeper than professional skepticism. And I had come here, to a remote facility that specialized in memory disorders and PTSD. To a place where I could study trauma while keeping the world at arm's length. I'd been looking for answers without knowing I was looking. The footage on this drive. I picked up the USB. The small piece of plastic suddenly heavy as a confession. What will I see? You'll see yourself walking into that lab with Emma. You'll see your father's notes about the memory modification program. You'll see the injection, the struggle, Emma running. You'll see me breaking my hands on bulletproof glass while your sister burned. His voice went very quiet. And you'll see the evidence that they're starting again. New facility, new protocols, new test subjects. The program didn't end with the fire. It just went deeper underground. I turned the drive over in my hands, this small key to a past I didn't remember, to a truth that would shatter everything I'd built in the 5 years since. If I look at this, I said slowly, if it's real, if it's all true, I can't unknow it. I can't go back to being the Dr. Nolan who just treats patients and publishes papers and pretends the world is basically sane. No, Julian agreed. You can't. But you'd be the Asha Nolan who knows what killed her sister. Who knows what was done to her. Who has a chance to stop it from happening to anyone else. He paused. And you'd be the woman your father died trying to protect. Outside my window, the ocean continued its endless percussion. The lighthouse beam, barely visible in daylight but still there, still sweeping, marked time in its 30-second intervals. The old monastery walls held their secrets close, stone and shadow and the bones of old prayers. I thought about Emma. About her laugh, her brilliance, her desperate hope that someone could help her quiet the screaming in her head. About my father, slumped over his desk, whatever he'd been writing lost to whoever had killed him. About the last 5 years of my life, the careful construction of professional distance, the nightmares I'd explained away, the feeling that I was living someone else's life in someone else's skin. I thought about the kind of person who would create a program to modify memories, to edit away trauma without consent, to treat human minds like corrupted code that could be rewritten. Who would kill to protect that program? Who would do it again if no one stopped them? And I thought about Julian Voss, sitting in my office with his scarred hands and his smoke-gray eyes, confessing sins I couldn't verify and truths I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Dangerous and broken, and possibly the only person who understood what had been taken from me. Patricia was right. This was a mistake. But some mistakes were inevitable. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. Show me, I said. Show me everything. Julian's expression shifted. Relief and sorrow and something darker. Something that looked like vindication. He moved around my desk, standing close enough that I could feel the heat of him, smell the salt and cedar scent that seemed to cling to his skin. Once you see this, there's no going back, he warned one last time. They'll know you know. And they'll come for you the way they came for your father, for Emma, for everyone who got too close to the truth. Let them come. I opened the first video file, my hands steady despite the way my heart was hammering. I've been running from ghosts for 5 years. Maybe it's time to find out what they look like. The video loaded, and my world ended. Because there on the screen, walking into that laboratory with Emma's hand clutched tight in hers, was me. Chapter 2. The Fever of Recognition. The video played in silence except for the timestamp in the corner. 11:43 p.m., November 7th. I watched myself lead Emma through a door marked Authorized Person Only. Watched myself move with purpose, not fear, like I knew exactly where I was going. My hair was longer then, pulled back in a ponytail that swung as I walked. I wore jeans and a Stanford sweatshirt. My father's sweatshirt, I realized with a jolt. The one that had gone missing after his death. The one I'd assumed I'd packed away somewhere and forgotten. Emma looked terrified. Even in grainy surveillance footage, I could see her hands shaking, see the way she kept looking over her shoulder. But she trusted me. Every few steps, she'd glance at my face, and whatever she saw there was enough to keep her moving forward. Keep watching, Julian said quietly from beside me. He'd pulled up a chair, sitting close enough that our shoulders almost touched. It gets worse. The footage switched to a different camera angle, inside the lab. Stainless steel counters. Equipment I couldn't identify. And in the center of the room, a woman in a white coat with her back to the camera, preparing something at a workstation. The timestamp jumped forward. 11:47 p.m. The woman turned, and I saw her face clearly. Dr. Sarah Chen, one of my father's colleagues at Stanford. A neural pharmacologist specializing in memory consolidation. I'd been to her house for dinner parties, had coffee with her after my father's funeral. Had received a sympathy card signed, with deepest condolences. She'd hugged me at my father's memorial service. Told me how much she'd admired him. On the screen, I watched her smile at me and Emma with the warmth of someone greeting old friends. She was the lead researcher on the memory modification program, Julian said. Your father trusted her. That's why he never saw the betrayal coming. I couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. Just watched as surveillance me sat Emma down in a chair, held her hand, spoke words I couldn't hear. Dr. Chan approached with a syringe, and Emma flinched but didn't pull away because I was there, because I was nodding, because I was telling her it would be okay. Because I was lying to my sister. You didn't know, Julian said, reading my expression. They'd already dosed you before you got there. Low-level compliance induction. Just enough to make you suggestible, cooperative. You thought you were helping her. Thought this was the breakthrough treatment your father had told you about. On screen, Dr. Chen injected something into Emma's arm. Then she turned to me. I wanted to look away. Wanted to close the laptop and pretend I'd never seen this. But I forced myself to keep watching as Dr. Chan approached surveillance me with a second syringe, as I held out my arm without hesitation, as the needle slid home. For 30 seconds nothing happened. Then Emma started seizing. Even without sound, the violence of it was horrifying. Her body arched in the chair, muscles locking, head snapping back. I, the surveillance version of me, lunged forward trying to hold her, screaming words that were lost to the silent footage. Dr. Chen stumbled backward, dropping the syringe. Her expression shifting from professional concern to genuine fear. And then I attacked her. It happened so fast I almost missed it. One moment I was trying to help Emma. The next I had Dr. Chen pinned against the lab counter, hands around her throat. The footage was clinical, dispassionate, but I could see the rage in my body language, the primal violence of someone watching their sister die and finding the person responsible. Emma collapsed out of the chair, still convulsing. I released Dr. Chen, who scrambled for an emergency phone, and went to Emma, pulling her into my arms, rocking her like she was a child. The timestamp jumped again. 11:52 p.m. Security personnel burst into the lab. 3 of them moving with military precision. They didn't try to help Emma. They didn't call for medical assistance. They went straight for me. I fought. God, I fought. Kicked, scratched, bit, everything feral and desperate. But they were trained and I wasn't. And within seconds they had me pinned face down on the floor. One of them produced another syringe. Larger this time. The contents dark even in the footage. That's the memory modification compound, Julian said, his voice tight. Full dose, uncontrolled. They were supposed to titrate it carefully over weeks. What they gave you was enough to wipe out days of memory, maybe more. Enough to cause permanent damage if they'd miscalculated. On screen, the needle plunged into my neck. I watched my body go rigid, then slack. Watched my eyes roll back as consciousness left me. And I watched Emma, still seizing on the floor, ignored by everyone except Dr. Chen, who knelt beside her with a phone pressed to her ear, her face pale with the dawning realization that she'd killed someone. The video cut to a different camera. Exterior shot of the building. Timestamp, 12:03 a.m. A figure running from a side door. Emma, somehow on her feet, somehow escaped. She moved erratically, stumbling but with terrible purpose. Behind her, 2 security personnel gave chase. She was carrying something. A file folder, papers clutched against her chest. The protocol documentation, Julian murmured. She grabbed it during the chaos. She knew they'd kill her if she stayed, so she ran. Led them to the research facility instead of away from it. She wanted the evidence destroyed even if she couldn't make it out alive. The timestamp jumped. 12:17 a.m. The same exterior shot, but now there was smoke. Then flames. Then an explosion that shattered windows and sent glass raining down like deadly snow. The video ended. The silence in my office felt profound, absolute. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and too fast. Could hear the click of the laptop hard drive, the distant cry of seabirds, the ocean's endless white noise. I closed the laptop with shaking hands. There's more, Julian said quietly. Interior footage from the facility during the fire. Medical records showing the dosages they used. Financial records linking Dr. Chen to Department of Defense black budget programs. Your father's emails. He paused. And surveillance footage from your apartment in Seattle. The one you thought you were staying in. It shows someone else checking in under your name, using your credit cards. A woman who looks enough like you to pass on hotel security cameras, but not close enough for anyone who actually knew you. I stood abruptly, my chair rolling backward and hitting the bookshelf. I needed to move, needed to do something with the adrenaline flooding my system. I went to the window, pressed my forehead against the cold glass. I held her. My voice came out broken. I watched her die and I don't remember. I don't remember her last words, her last moments. They took that from me. They took her from me. Julian stood but didn't approach, giving me space. The memory isn't gone completely. It's suppressed, buried under the false Seattle timeline. With the right therapeutic techniques, you could potentially recover some of it. But he hesitated. It would be dangerous, fragmentary, and possibly traumatic enough to cause a psychotic break similar to what Emma experienced. I don't care. I turned to face him. If there's a chance I can remember her, really remember her, I'll take it. Even if remembering kills you. Especially if remembering kills me. I moved toward him, closing the distance between us without fully realizing I was doing it. Because right now I'm living a lie. Every memory I have of that night is fabricated. Every time I think about my sister, I'm seeing the version of events they wanted me to see. I'm a ghost haunting someone else's life, and I'm done with it. Something shifted in Julian's expression. The careful control slipped, and underneath it I saw pain that matched my own, raw and bleeding and years old. I know what you mean, he said softly. I've been a ghost for 5 years. Running, hiding, trying to stay alive long enough to find someone who could help me stop them. Do you know what it's like, watching the world move on while you're stuck in one moment, one failure, one fire that never stops burning? Yes. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. I know exactly what that's like. We stood there, less than a foot apart, two people who'd been circling the same tragedy from different angles, finally meeting at ground zero. And I realized something that should have terrified me but instead felt inevitable. I believed him. Every impossible word. Every conspiracy, every cover-up, every death disguised as natural causes. I believed it because it explained the gaps in my life, the nightmares, the feeling that I'd been sleepwalking through the last 5 years waiting for something to wake me up. What happens now? Yes. Now we find the evidence your father hid. The original research protocols, the list of test subjects, the DoD contracts, everything that proves the program existed and is still operating. We take it public, burn down everyone involved. He paused. And we try to survive long enough to do it. They'll know. What you said earlier. If they're monitoring this facility, if they have people here, they'll know you showed me the footage. They already know. They've known since the moment I walked through these doors. Julian's expression hardened. But they can't move against us openly. Not without drawing attention to what they're hiding. They'll try to discredit us first. Make us look unstable, delusional. Maybe arrange an accident that can be explained away. His eyes met mine. That's why we need to move fast. Your father's evidence is the only leverage we have. I don't know where it is. If he told me that memory's gone, then we'll have to reconstruct his thinking. Where would he hide something that important? Somewhere you could access but they couldn't. Somewhere connected to you or Emma. I thought about my father's habits. His paranoia that I'd dismissed as academic eccentricity. The way he'd kept multiple encrypted drives, layers of password protection on his computer. The way he'd started using cash for everything in the months before he died, avoiding digital trails. His office at Stanford, I said slowly. I check it every year, but I never knew what I was looking for. It's been cleared out, reassigned to another professor. But he had a habit of hiding things in plain sight. Books with hollowed-out centers, false bottoms in desk drawers. Would they have found those? Maybe. Probably. I chewed my lip thinking. But there's one place they wouldn't think to look. My mother's grave. Julian's eyebrows rose. The cemetery. She's buried in Colma, south of the city. My father visited every week, brought flowers, sat and talked to her for hours. After he died, I found receipts for a safety deposit box at a bank near the cemetery. But when I tried to access it, I was told it had been closed months before his death. Contents transferred according to his instructions. I met Julian's eyes. What if he didn't close it? What if he transferred the contents to somewhere only I would think to look? The grave itself. Her headstone is granite, 3 feet tall, set in concrete. But my father was obsessed with details. He designed it himself, supervised the installation. If he wanted to hide something there, he could have built in a compartment during construction. Julian was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he nodded. It's a lead. Better than anything else we have. When can you leave? I can't just walk out of here. I have patients scheduled, responsibilities. Your patients will be reassigned. Your responsibilities don't matter if you're dead. He moved closer, and I could feel the intensity rolling off him like heat. They know you've seen the footage now, Asha. They know you're no longer under control. The only question is how long they'll wait before they act. How long do we have? Hours. Maybe a day. His hand came up, hovering near my face but not quite touching. They'll want to plan it carefully, make it look natural. But the clock is ticking. I should have been terrified. Should have called security, had him removed, contacted authorities, assuming I could trust any authorities. Instead, I found myself leaning into that almost touch, craving the contact even as I knew how dangerous it was. Why did you come back? Yes. You were safe, hidden. You could have stayed disappeared. Why risk everything to find me? Julian's hand finally made contact, his fingers gentle against my cheek. His touch was warm, solid, real in a way that nothing else had felt in 5 years. Because I made a promise, he said quietly. That night, while I was destroying my hands trying to break through that glass, while I was watching your sister burn, I promised myself that if I survived, I would find you. I would tell you the truth. I would give you back what they stole, even if it cost me everything. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone. I've been looking for you for 5 years, Asha. I've been carrying your sister's last words, waiting for someone who could hear them. My breath caught. She said something. At the end, she was on the other side of the glass. The fire was everywhere, and she knew she wasn't getting out. But she looked right at me, and she screamed one thing over and over. His voice went rough with emotion. She screamed, "Save Asha. Promise me you'll save Asha." Tears burned my eyes, blurred my vision. She knew. Even at the end, she was trying to protect me. She loved you. And she knew what they'd done to you, what they'd stolen. Her last act was making sure the evidence burned so they couldn't use you as a test subject again. Julian's other hand came up, cradling my face between his scarred palms. I couldn't save her. But I can keep my promise to her. I can save you. I was crying now. 5 years of grief finally breaking through the artificial calm, the manufactured memories, the therapeutic distance. I cried for Emma, for my father, for the life I'd lost and didn't even know I was mourning. And Julian Voss, this man I should have hated, this stranger who'd been carrying my sister's dying words for 5 years, this ghost who'd found another ghost, held me while I shattered. His arms came around me, strong and certain, pulling me against his chest. He smelled like cedar and salt and smoke, like the fire we'd both survived in different ways. One hand moved to the back of my head, fingers threading through my hair, holding me together while I fell apart. "I've got you," he murmured against my temple. "I've got you. You're not alone anymore." And despite everything, the conspiracy, the danger, the impossible situation, I felt safer than I had in 5 years. Like I'd finally found solid ground after years of freefall. Like I'd come home to a place I didn't know I'd been missing. I pulled back slightly, just enough to look up at him. His face was close enough that I could count the silver threads in his dark hair, see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, read the complex map of emotion in those smoke-gray eyes. "I don't even know you," I whispered. "Yes, you do." His voice was certain, absolute. "You've known me since the fire. We've been circling each other for 5 years, 2 ghosts haunting the same tragedy. You just don't remember yet. Then help me remember. Something dangerous flickered in his expression. That's not a good idea. The memory recovery process is unpredictable. You could end up more damaged then. I don't care. I reached up, my hand covering his where it still cradled my face. I need to know. I need to see what they took from me. Even if it breaks me. Julian studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing options, calculating risks. Then his expression shifted into something that looked like resignation mixed with respect. All right, but not here. Somewhere we can control, somewhere they can't monitor. He stepped back, and the loss of his warmth felt physical. We leave tonight. Drive to Colma, check your mother's grave. If we find what your father hid, we take it somewhere safe and figure out our next move. If we don't, he shrugged. We improvise. Just like that. We just leave. Just like that. Unless you want to wait around for them to kill you in your sleep. Put that way, the choice seemed obvious. I looked around my office. This sanctuary I'd built, this careful construction of professional competence and therapeutic distance. The books I'd collected, the papers I'd published, the life I'd made from fragments of someone else's memories. All of it built on lies. All of it about to burn. I need to pack. Get my files, my research. Leave it. Anything you take from here can be traced, tracked. We travel light and fast. Julian pulled out a phone. Not a smartphone, one of those old prepaid flip phones that couldn't be remotely accessed. I have cash, a car registered to a dead man, and a list of places they won't think to look for us. That's all we need. You've done this before. I've been running for 5 years. You learn what matters and what doesn't. He checked his watch. We have maybe 6 hours before they move against us. I need to get some supplies, arrange transportation. Can you be ready by 8 p.m.? Where should I meet you? The old chapel at the north end of the grounds. It's not monitored. Too structurally unstable for regular use. There's a service road that leads directly to the highway. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at me. Asha, don't tell anyone. Not Marcus, not Patricia. No one. Anyone could be compromised, and we can't risk it. I nodded, understanding the paranoia now, feeling it settle into my bones like a new language. Julian opened the door, checked the hallway, then looked back one more time. 8 p.m. Don't be late. A slight smile ghosted across his lips. I've waited 5 years to keep my promise. I'd really prefer not to die before I finish. Then he was gone, disappearing down the hallway with the fluid certainty of someone who'd spent years learning to vanish. I stood alone in my office, surrounded by books about trauma and memory, about healing and recovery, about all the ways the mind protects itself from unbearable truth. And I realized I was about to throw it all away. My career, my safety, my carefully reconstructed life. All for a truth I might not survive learning. All for a sister who'd died trying to save me. All for a promise made to a ghost by another ghost who'd spent 5 years trying to find me. I looked at the USB drive still sitting on my desk. Such a small thing to contain so much destruction. I picked it up, held it in my palm, felt its weight. Then I slipped it into my pocket and started planning how to disappear. Outside my window, the ocean continued its endless percussion. The lighthouse swept its beam across the water every 30 seconds. 1, 2, 3, marking time until 8 p.m. Until I became a ghost again. But this time I'd be a ghost who remembered how she died. And God's help the people who'd killed her. Chapter 3. The Confession Room. The hours between noon and 8 p.m. stretched like taffy, elastic and suffocating. I went through the motions of my afternoon schedule with mechanical precision. 2 patient sessions where I nodded and made clinical observations while my mind calculated escape routes. A staff meeting where I sat silent and invisible while Marcus discussed facility improvements and Patricia presented her latest research findings. Dinner in the staff cafeteria where I pushed food around my plate and pretended everything was normal while counting down the minutes. No one seemed to notice anything was wrong. Or maybe they did, and they were just waiting for the right moment to stop me. The paranoia Julian carried like a second skin had infected me completely. I analyzed every glance, every casual question, every friendly smile for hidden meaning. Was the security guard at the east entrance watching me more closely than usual? Had the nurse at the medication station asked about my day with genuine interest or calculated fishing? When Dr. Chen, not Sarah Chen, a different Dr. Chen, but the name alone made my stomach turn, stopped me in the hallway to discuss a patient transfer, was it routine or reconnaissance? By 7 p.m. I was jumping at shadows. I packed nothing as instructed. Just my phone, powered off, SIM card removed and flushed down the toilet, and my wallet with its useless credit cards and ID that might as well have belonged to someone else. The USB drive stayed in my pocket, pressed against my thigh like a talisman, or a time bomb. I'd locked my office door for the last time at 6:47 p.m., leaving behind 7 years of work, of careful construction, of the life I'd built on lies. The books would be reassigned, the patient files transferred. Within a week, it would be like Dr. Asha Nolan had never existed here at all. Appropriate, since Dr. Asha Nolan had never really existed anywhere. The walk to the old chapel took 12 minutes through grounds that felt suddenly foreign, hostile. The facility sprawled across 15 acres of coastal property, a maze of buildings connected by stone pathways and covered walkways. In daylight, it was picturesque. Crumbling Gothic architecture softened by careful landscaping, the ocean view dramatic and therapeutic. In twilight, with fog rolling in and the temperature dropping, it looked like a place where people came to disappear. The chapel sat at the furthest edge of the property, separated from the main buildings by a stretch of wild grass and wind-twisted cypress trees. It was the original monastery structure, 1892, built by Franciscan monks who'd apparently believed suffering brought you closer to God. The building had been deemed structurally unsound 15 years ago, too expensive to renovate and too historically significant to demolish. So it sat empty, windows boarded, door chained, slowly surrendering to the salt air and time. I'd only been inside once, during my first week here, when Marcus had given me the full facility tour. It had been beautiful in its decay. Vaulted ceilings still intact, stone floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, stained glass windows so thick with grime they barely let in light. And the silence inside had been different from the rest of the facility. Older, heavier, like the building itself was holding its breath. Now, approaching it in the gathering dark, I understood why Julian had chosen it. No security cameras, no foot traffic, no reason for anyone to look. The perfect place to vanish from. The chapel door, which should have been chained, stood slightly ajar. I slipped inside, pulling it closed behind me. The interior was darker than I remembered, my eyes struggling to adjust after the last of the twilight. I could make out shapes, the rows of broken pews, the altar stripped of everything sacred, the holes in the roof where time had finally won. The smell was damp stone and rotting wood and something else, something that reminded me of incense, though that was probably just my imagination supplying details it thought should be there. Asha! I spun toward the voice. Julian stepped out from behind a pillar, materializing from shadow like he'd been waiting there for hours. Maybe he had been. He'd changed clothes, dark jeans, black jacket, boots meant for running. His hair was wet again like he'd showered, washing away any trace evidence that could be used to track him. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the boarded windows, he looked even more like a ghost than usual. Beautiful and dangerous and not quite real. "You came," he said, and there was relief in his voice that suggested he'd expected me to change my mind. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you'd think about it. Realize how insane this is. Call security and have me transferred to a real psychiatric facility." Slight smile. I would have understood. Self-preservation is supposed to be instinctual. Maybe my instincts are broken. I moved closer, my footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. Or maybe I'm just tired of being afraid of ghosts. You should be afraid. Fear keeps you alive. Fear kept me docile for 5 years. I'm done with it. Julian studied me for a moment, and I could see him reassessing, recalculating. "You've changed. In just 12 hours you've... He gestured vaguely. You're different, Harper. Like someone turned on a light. Someone showed me I'd been living in the dark. I looked around the ruined chapel, at the broken pews and forgotten altar. Is this where you've been hiding? All day. This and other places. The grounds are larger than people realize. If you know where the blind spots are, you can move around without being seen. He pulled a backpack from behind the pillar. Black, nondescript, probably containing everything he owned. I've been watching the security rotations. They're regular, predictable. We have a 7-minute window when they switch positions. That's when we move. Where's the car? Service road, half a mile north. I parked it this morning before I checked myself in. He glanced at his watch. Analog, no GPS, we leave in 3 minutes. Once we're outside the gates, we have maybe an hour before they realize you're gone. 2 hours before they start searching. 4 hours before they alert authorities and put out an APB with a cover story about a dangerous patient abducting a staff member. The scenario was so specific it had to be based on experience. You've done this before. Escaped from somewhere, I mean. Twice. Once from a private hospital in Oregon where they'd traced me. Once from a hotel in Nevada when I realized the maid was asking too many questions. His expression was matter of fact. You learn the patterns. How long you have, what mistakes people make, where they expect you to run so you can go somewhere else instead. And we're going to Colma. Eventually. First we drive south, make it look like we're heading to LA. Then we double back on side roads, approach from the east. If they're tracking us, and they will be, it'll buy us time. He moved toward a side door I hadn't noticed, partially hidden behind debris. This leads to the old cemetery behind the chapel. There's a break in the fence, then the service road. Stay close, stay quiet. If something goes wrong. Nothing's going wrong. If something goes wrong, he continued, you run. You don't wait for me, you don't try to help. You get to the nearest public place and call a number I'll give you. They'll extract you, get you somewhere safe. Who are they? People your father trusted. People who've been trying to expose this program for years but couldn't get enough evidence to move. He pulled out a piece of paper, handed it to me. A phone number, written in careful block letters. Memorize it. Then destroy it. I looked at the number. 10 digits that might mean survival or might mean walking into another trap. But what choice did I have? I'd already committed to this path. Already burned my bridges. Already chosen to trust a man I barely knew because he'd made a promise to my dying sister. I memorized the number. Then I tore the paper into tiny pieces and scattered them across the stone floor. Good. Julian checked his watch again. Time. Let's go. We moved through the ruined chapel like ghosts through a graveyard. Silent, swift, leaving no trace. The side door opened onto what had once been a meditation garden, now overgrown with wild grass and blackberry bushes. Beyond it, I could see the old cemetery Julian had mentioned. Tilted headstones dating back to the monastery's founding, names worn away by salt air and time. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to maybe 20 feet. Perfect cover but also disorienting. I stayed close to Julian, following his confident movements through the darkness. He moved like someone with night vision, never hesitating, never second-guessing his path. The fence appeared suddenly. Chain link, rusted, with a gap near the corner post wide enough for a person to slip through. Julian went first, holding the edges apart, then helped me through with a hand on my back that lingered just a moment too long. On the other side was the service road, barely more than 2 parallel tire tracks through dead grass. And there, parked in shadow beneath a stand of eucalyptus trees, was the promised car. Old Honda Civic, gray paint faded to primer in places, the kind of vehicle you'd pass on the highway without a second glance. Perfect camouflage. Julian unlocked it. Actual key, no electronic fob, and we slipped inside. The interior smelled like old coffee and something chemical, maybe cleaning solution. The back seat was empty except for a plastic bag that probably contained supplies. No personal effects, nothing identifying. He started the engine, which turned over smoothly despite the car's decrepit appearance, and pulled onto the service road without turning on the headlights. "Buckle up," he said quietly. "It's going to be a long night." We drove in silence for the first 20 minutes, navigating dirt roads and back highways with only parking lights to guide us. Julian kept checking the mirrors, his eyes constantly moving, scanning for threats I couldn't see. I should have been terrified. Should have been second-guessing this decision, this insane flight with a man I'd met less than 24 hours ago. Instead, I felt weirdly calm, clear-headed, like I'd been holding my breath for 5 years and was finally exhaling. "Tell me about Emma," Julian said suddenly. "Before the trial. What was she like?" The question caught me off guard. Why? Because I only knew her at the end. I only saw what they'd done to her, not who she was before. And because, he paused, because she spent her last moments trying to save you. I want to understand who you were to each other. I looked out the window at the fog-shrouded darkness, at the highway signs passing in the night. Remembered Emma the way she'd been before everything went wrong. "She was brilliant," I said quietly. "Dual PhD track at Berkeley, neuroscience and philosophy. She wanted to understand consciousness, figure out how subjective experience emerges from neural activity. She was writing her dissertation on the hard problem of qualia when the anxiety disorder hit." I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. It came out of nowhere. One day she was fine. The next she was having panic attacks so severe she couldn't leave her apartment. Traditional medications didn't help, made it worse sometimes. That's why she volunteered for the trial. She was desperate, and someone she trusted told her it would help. "Your father." He thought he was saving her. Thought this was cutting-edge treatment that could actually cure anxiety disorders instead of just managing symptoms. The anger came back, sharp and bitter. They used his love for her against him. Used mine. Made us complicit in destroying her. Julian was quiet for a moment. Then, "She talked about you during the sessions I witnessed. Before they started the real modifications. When it was still just psychological evaluation and baseline measurements. She said you were the reason she wanted to get better. That you'd already lost your mother. And she couldn't bear the thought of you losing her too." Tears burned my eyes. I pressed my palm against the cool window glass, using the physical sensation to stay grounded. I did lose her. And I don't even remember saying goodbye. That's not entirely true. Julian's voice went soft. The memories aren't gone, just suppressed. With the right triggers, the right therapeutic approach, they could surface. Fragmented, maybe unreliable, but there. You said it was dangerous. That it could cause a psychotic break. It could. The memory modification compound works by disrupting reconsolidation, the process where memories become malleable when recalled. Force recalled too aggressively, and you can destabilize the whole system. He glanced at me. But there are gentler methods. Sensory triggers, environmental recreation, guided meditation. It takes time and it's unpredictable, but it's possible. You've studied this. The memory recovery process. I've studied everything about the program. I spent 5 years trying to understand what they'd created, how it worked, how to counter it. His jaw tightened. I thought if I understood the mechanism, I could find a way to undo what they'd done to you. Give you back what they stole. Why? I turned to face him. Why does it matter so much to you? You made a promise to Emma, fine. But this? I gestured at the car, at our flight into the night, at everything. This is more than obligation. This is obsession. Julian was silent for a long time. Long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he pulled off the highway onto an empty rest stop, parking in the furthest corner away from the road. He turned off the engine. Turned to face me in the sudden quiet. "Do you remember the last thing I said to you? In the prologue, when we first met? You said a lot of things. I said I knew the ghost. That I'd been waiting for her to remember she wasn't dead yet." His eyes found mine in the darkness. "That wasn't poetic license, Asha. I meant it literally. I know you. Not the Dr. Nolan you've become, But the woman you were before they reprogrammed you. The woman who walked into fire for her sister. The woman who looked at me through flames and... He stopped, something raw crossing his face. And what? And made me want to be someone worth saving. The words hung between us, heavy with meaning I couldn't quite parse. I stared at him, this man who'd been a stranger 12 hours ago but felt like someone I'd known forever, and felt something shift in my chest. Recognition. Not of his face or his voice, but of something deeper. Something that predated memory. You're saying we knew each other. Before the fire. We met 3 times. The first was at your father's house, when he introduced me as a colleague who could help him shut down the program. The second was 2 days later, when you came to my office at Voss Pharmaceuticals to go through his evidence. The third. His voice dropped lower. The third was the night of the fire. In the lab, after they'd dosed you but before the security team arrived. You looked at me and you said, "What did I say?" Julian reached out slowly, his scarred hand cupping my face the way he had in my office. His thumb brushed my cheekbone, and the touch sent electricity down my spine. You said, "I trust you. Whatever happens, I trust you." His eyes held mine, smoke and shadow and 5 years of carrying those words. And then they took you away, and they made you forget I existed. Made you forget that for 3 days we were. He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter. That Asha is gone. You're someone different now. What if I'm not? The words came out before I could stop them. What if I'm still her, just buried under lies? What if that's why this feels? I gestured between us, at the magnetic pull I'd been fighting since the moment he'd walked into my office. Why you don't feel like a stranger? Don't. His voice went rough. Don't say that unless you mean it. Don't give me hope that you remember something we both know you can't. Then help me remember. I leaned into his touch, my hand coming up to cover his. Do the therapy, the sensory triggers, whatever it takes. Give me back those 3 days. Give me back the woman who trusted you. Asha. I'm not afraid. Not anymore. And it was true. The fear that had defined the last 5 years had burned away, leaving only determination and something else. Something that felt like hunger. Show me. Help me see what they stole. Julian stared at me, and I could see the war in his eyes. Caution versus desire, responsibility versus need. Then something broke, some final restraint snapping. He kissed me. Not gentle. Not tentative. Hard and desperate, and 5 years in the making. His mouth crashed against mine like he was trying to breathe life into a drowning woman, like he was trying to wake me up through sheer force of will. His hand slid into my hair, fingers tightening, holding me in place while he devoured me with a kind of intensity that should have been frightening but instead felt like coming home. I kissed him back just as desperately, my hands fisting in his jacket, pulling him closer. He tasted like coffee and something darker, something that might have been grief or rage or both. The kiss was angry and tender and absolutely nothing like a first kiss should be. Because it wasn't first, some part of me knew that now. This was reunion and recognition and remembering something my conscious mind had forgotten but my body still knew. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian pressed his forehead against mine. That was a mistake, he whispered. I don't care. You should. You can't do this. Can't let this be about. He pulled back, putting inches between us that felt like miles. About feelings that might not be real. Might just be trauma bonding and false memory and desperation. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what this is. I've spent 5 years imagining finding you, and now that I have, I can't tell what's real and what's just. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. We need to focus. Find the evidence. Stop the program. Everything else is a distraction we can't afford. He was right. Logically, rationally, objectively right. But logic had nothing to do with the way my heart was hammering, the way my lips still burned from his kiss, the way every cell in my body was screaming that this, him, was the realest thing I'd touched in 5 years. Fine, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We focus. We find the evidence. We burn down everyone who hurt Emma and my father and every other person they've destroyed. I met his eyes. But don't tell me this doesn't mean anything. Don't tell me you don't feel it too. Julian looked at me for a long moment. Then he started the car. Colma's 2 hours from here, he said, pulling back onto the highway. Try to sleep. You'll need your energy for what comes next. But I didn't sleep. Just sat in the darkness, touching my lips, feeling the ghost of his kiss, and wondering if the woman I used to be had loved him. Wondering if the woman I was becoming would make the same choice. The fog followed us south, thick and relentless, turning the highway into a tunnel through clouds. Other cars passed like ghosts, their headlights diffused to glowing smears. And somewhere behind us, I knew people were waking up to my absence. Marcus checking my quarters. Security reviewing camera footage. Someone making phone calls, activating protocols, starting the hunt. But we had hours still. Hours before they caught up, before the net closed. Hours to find truth in a graveyard. Hours to remember what they'd stolen. And maybe, just maybe, hours to figure out if the man driving beside me was my salvation or just another beautiful lie in a life built on them. The lighthouse beam from Cliff House had disappeared behind us miles ago, but I could still feel its rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Counting down to something inevitable. Counting down to fire. Or resurrection. Or both. Chapter 4. The lie beneath the truth. Colma appeared out of the fog like a city built from memory. The City of Souls, they called it. A 2-square-mile municipality south of San Francisco that housed 17 cemeteries and fewer than 2,000 living residents. The dead outnumbered the living by 1,000 to 1, making it the most densely populated necropolis in America. My mother had found this fact darkly amusing when she'd picked out her burial plot, years before cancer took her. At least I'll have plenty of company, she joked. And the neighbors will be quiet. We arrived at 11:47 p.m., pulling into the empty parking lot of Olivet Memorial Park. The cemetery sprawled across 40 acres of manicured grass and granite monuments, dotted with cypress trees that looked like sentinels in the fog. Closed hours were sunset to sunrise, but Julian had clipped the chain on the pedestrian gate earlier in the day. Another piece of pre-planning that spoke to how long he'd been orchestrating this. Stay close, he said, killing the engine. Security drives through every 2 hours. We have until 1 a.m. We moved through the gate like trespassers at our own funeral, following paths I knew by heart. I'd come here every year on my mother's birthday, bringing flowers she couldn't see and apologies she couldn't hear. After my father died, I'd started coming twice a year, once for her, once for both of them, because he was buried 3 rows over in the plot he'd purchased beside hers. They're together? Julian asked, following my lead through the maze of headstones. He wanted to be. Spent 13 years alone after she died, but he never dated, never moved on. Just visited her grave every week and waited for his turn. The memory ached. I used to think it was romantic. Now I wonder if it was just exhaustion. If he was just tired of carrying everything alone. He wasn't alone. He had you. He had the daughter he'd made complicit in killing her own sister. I'm sure that was a great comfort. Julian's hand found mine in the darkness. His scarred fingers threading through mine. The touch was warm, grounding, real. He didn't blame you. I saw his face that night, Asha. When they took you away, when he realized what they'd done. He was trying to protect you, not punish you. His grip tightened. Whatever he hid here, he meant for you to find it. That was an act of faith, not accusation. We stopped in front of my mother's headstone. Granite, 3 feet tall like I'd remembered, with roses carved into the corners and her name in elegant script. Catherine and Nolan, beloved wife and mother, March 12, 1958 to August 3, 2007. Until we meet again. The ground around it was well maintained, grass trimmed, no weeds. I knelt, running my fingers over the carved letters, feeling the grooves worn smooth by weather and time. How do we know it's here? Asked. It's solid granite set in concrete. There's no obvious. Your father was a chess player, Julian said, kneeling beside me. Always thinking 3 moves ahead. He wouldn't make it obvious, but he'd make it findable for someone who knew how he thought. He pulled out a small flashlight, shielding the beam with his hand. You said he designed this himself, supervised installation, down to the last detail. The stonecutter said he'd never had a client so specific about measurements and placement. Julian moved the light slowly across the monument, examining every detail. The carved roses, the beveled edges, the way the stone sat on its concrete base. His fingers traced the carved letters of my mother's name, pressing gently, testing. Catherine and Nolan, he murmured. Then. Your father's name was David Alexander Nolan. Then. He looked at me. And your name? Asha Catherine Nolan. Understanding sparked. AKN. 3 sets of initials. What if? Julian moved to my father's headstone 3 rows over. Same height, same style, same roses. What if the key isn't in your mother's monument? What if it's in the relationship between them? We both stared at the 2 headstones, separated by 3 rows and 15 feet of manicured grass. There had to be something I was missing, some pattern my father would have known I'd recognize. Then I saw it. The roses, I said. They're different. Julian swung the flashlight back to my mother's stone. 4 roses carved at the corners, each identical, each in full bloom. My father's stone had 3 roses. 1 at the top left corner, 2 at the bottom. 1, 2, 3, Julian said. Or 1 on top, 2 on bottom. Coordinates. I moved between the stones, measuring with my eyes. If you draw a line from the single rose on my father's stone to the 4 on my mother's, they intersect. Here. Julian was already moving to a spot between the 2 headstones, where a smaller marker sat flush with the ground. A flat granite square, maybe 18 inches across, that looked like a simple footer stone. The kind used to mark unused plots or provide additional information. This one was blank. No name, no date. Just smooth granite with a single carved symbol in the center. A small rose, identical to the ones on both headstones. Julian pulled out a folding knife, military grade, serrated edge, and worked it into the gap between the granite square and the concrete surrounding it. The blade scraped, found purchase, and he leveraged it up. The stone came free more easily than it should have, revealing not concrete beneath but metal. A small waterproof safe, maybe 10 inches deep, set into the ground. Smart, Julian murmured. Hide it in plain sight. Anyone checking the headstones themselves would find nothing. But someone who understood the pattern would know where to look. I stared at the safe, this small box that contained whatever truth my father had died protecting. Do we need the combination? Julian examined the lock. Biometric. Fingerprint scanner. He looked at me. It would be keyed to either him or you. Probably you, since you'd be the one retrieving it. My hands were shaking as I pressed my thumb against the scanner. For 3 seconds nothing happened. Then a soft click, green light, and the seal released. Inside were 3 items. A leather journal, a thumb drive, and a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's precise handwriting. I reached for the envelope, but Julian caught my wrist. Wait. Before you open that, before we look at any of this, you need to understand something. His voice was urgent, almost pleading. Whatever's in here, whatever your father documented, it's going to be worse than you imagine. The people involved, the scope of the program, the things they were willing to do. Are you ready for that? Does it matter? We came for the truth. I'm not going to flinch from it now. You might want to. But he released my wrist, sitting back on his heels. Once you know, you can't unknow. And the people who did this, they're not going to let you walk away with this information. They're going to come for us with everything they have. Let them come. I picked up the envelope, my father's handwriting blurring through sudden tears. Let them try. The envelope wasn't sealed, just tucked closed. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in my father's neat script. My darling Asha, if you're reading this, Then I failed to protect you, and you've had to protect yourself. I'm so sorry. Sorry for involving you in this nightmare. Sorry for not seeing the danger until it was too late. Sorry for every choice that led you to this moment. The journal contains my complete documentation of the memory modification program, protocols, test subjects, funding sources, everyone involved. The drive has video evidence, financial records, and the original DoD contracts. It's enough to destroy the program and everyone who authorized it. But Asha, you need to know, your sister's death wasn't an accident, and neither was mine. We were killed because we got too close to the truth about what they were really developing. The memory modification was never about treating PTSD. That was just the cover story. They're creating a way to weaponize memory itself. To implant false memories that feel absolutely real. Creating witnesses who believe they saw things that never happened. To edit memories of enemy combatants, turning loyal soldiers into unwitting traitors. To erase knowledge from people's minds, making whistleblowers forget what they knew. It's mind control, perfected and deployable. Emma found out. She saw documentation about the program's real goals during one of her sessions, and she understood what it meant. That's why they killed her. Not because she was unstable, but because she was about to expose them. You saw it too that night. That's why they dosed you, why they had to make you forget. You had proof, evidence, names. You were going to help me stop them. I don't know if the memory modification they did to you is reversible. Hope it is. I hope you can recover what they stole. But if you can't, if those memories are gone forever, then please know this. You were so brave. You looked at the evidence of what they'd done to your sister, and instead of breaking, you got angry. You demanded we fight back. You said, if we don't stop them, they'll do this to thousands of people. Emma wouldn't want us to hide. You were right. Emma wouldn't want us to hide. So I'm not hiding this evidence. I'm leaving it for you because you're the only person I trust to finish what we started. You're the only person who loved Emma enough to burn the world down for her. Be careful, my brilliant daughter. Be smart. Be angry. Be everything I taught you to be, and more. And if you find yourself working with Julian Voss, and I suspect you will, since he's the only other person who knows about this hiding place, then trust him. He loved your sister too in his way. He tried to save her. He'll try to save you. Let him. I love you always, Dad. The letter blurred completely as tears spilled over. I pressed the paper against my chest, trying to hold in the grief that was threatening to crack me open. Julian moved closer, one arm coming around my shoulders. Breathe, he said quietly. Just breathe. I've got you. But I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think past the roaring in my head. He loved your sister too in his way. I pulled away from Julian, the letter clutched in my shaking hands. What does that mean? He loved your sister too. Julian's expression closed off, became carefully neutral. Asha. What does it mean, Julian? My voice was rising, edging toward hysteria. My father wrote that like you and Emma were, like you had some kind of... We did. He said it quietly, simply, like he was admitting to a crime. Emma and I. For the 3 weeks between when I met her and when she died. We. He stopped, searching for words. It wasn't planned. I was trying to help your father shut down the program, and she was his daughter, and she was brilliant and broken and trying so hard to be brave. And I fell. No. I stood up abruptly, stumbling backward. No, you don't get to tell me you were in love with my sister. You don't get to. I wasn't in love with her. Julian stood too, hands raised placatingly. It wasn't like that. It was 3 weeks, Asha. 3 weeks of late-night conversations and desperate moments when we thought we were all going to die. It was grief and fear and loneliness, not... He stopped, jaw tightening. It doesn't matter now. She's gone, and whatever we had ended in that fire. But that's not all, is it? The pieces were clicking together with horrible clarity. My father said Emma found out about the program's real goals during one of her sessions. But if you were seeing her, if you were helping my father, she would have told you. She would have. I stopped staring at him. You knew. You knew what they were really developing before the fire. Yes. And you let her go into that building anyway. You let her try to destroy the evidence even though you knew they'd kill her for it. I tried to stop her. His voice was low, strained. I tried to get her to wait, to let me handle it. But she said. He stopped, something breaking in his expression. She said if she didn't do it, they'd kill you. That you were the real target, that they'd already started modifying your memories, that she was running out of time to save you. So she went in alone, and she locked the doors behind her, and she made sure I couldn't follow. The fog seemed to press closer, suffocating. Why didn't you tell me this? Why let me think she was just some random test subject who went crazy? Because I needed you focused, angry but not destroyed. If I told you everything at once, that Emma and I were involved, that she died specifically to save you, that every memory you have of her final months is a lie, you would have broken. And I needed you whole enough to help me finish this. You manipulated me. I protected you. His voice sharpened. There's a difference. I gave you information in doses you could handle, the same way you'd treat a patient with recovered trauma. Would you rather I dumped everything on you at once? Let you fracture trying to process it all? He was right, clinically speaking. The therapeutic approach was sound. But that didn't make it feel any less like betrayal. What else haven't you told me? I demanded. What other lies are you carrying? Julian stared at me for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, creased and worn like he'd been carrying it for years. This, he said, handing it to me. This is what I haven't told you. I looked at the photo. It showed 4 people sitting at an outdoor cafe, coffee cups and notebooks scattered across the table. My father, younger and healthier than I remembered him. Emma, smiling, her hand resting on someone's arm. Me, looking at Julian Voss with an expression I'd never seen on my own face before. Open, happy, completely unguarded. In the photo, his arm was around my shoulders. My head rested against his chest. We looked like lovers. That was taken 3 days before the fire, Julian said quietly. At a cafe near your father's house. We'd been up all night going through evidence, planning how to expose the program. Emma took the photo. She said. His voice cracked. She said we looked good together. That she was glad you'd finally found someone who understood why the work mattered. I couldn't speak. Couldn't process. Just stared at the photo of a woman who looked like me but wasn't, who smiled like she knew secrets I'd forgotten, who looked at Julian Voss like he was the answer to questions she hadn't known she was asking. You said we met 3 times, I finally managed. You said we were what? Dating. Involved. What were we, Julian? I don't know. He took the photo back, tucked it carefully into his jacket. We didn't have time to define it. It was 3 days of high-intensity crisis mode. We worked together, we trusted each other, and somewhere in there He gestured helplessly. We connected. And then they took you away. And they made you forget I existed. And I've spent 5 years trying to figure out if what I felt was real or just trauma bonding. And now I know it was real. His eyes met mine, gray smoke in the darkness. Because I've known you for 12 hours this time, and it feels exactly the same. Like recognition. Like coming home. Like something I lost and thought I'd never find again. The words should have been romantic. Should have made my heart soar. Instead, they felt like a weight, like another layer of lies stacked on top of everything else I'd learned tonight. How do I know that's real? Yes. How do I know it's not just you projecting what you want to see? Missing someone who doesn't exist anymore. You don't. But neither do I. He moved closer, careful, like approaching a wounded animal. That's the hell of it, Asha. I don't know if you can ever be the woman you were before they modified you. I don't know if recovering those memories would give you back that person, or just destroy who you've become. And I don't know if what I feel is love for who you are now, or grief for who you were then. That's not fair. None of this is fair. His hand came up, cupping my face the way he had in the car, in my office, like touching me was the only thing that kept him grounded. But it's what we have. fragments and photographs, and the memory of a promise made to your dying sister. That's all I've got, and I'm trying to build something real from it. I should have pushed him away. Should have maintained professional distance, emotional boundaries, all the things my training said were necessary. But I was so tired of distance. So tired of living half a life built on false foundations. So I kissed him. This time it was different. Not desperate, not angry. Slow and searching, like I was trying to taste memory itself, trying to find the woman I'd been in the touch of his lips. He responded carefully, gently, like he was afraid I'd shatter if he held too tight. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine. "We need to go," he whispered. "Security will be here soon." But neither of us moved. Just stood there in the fog and darkness, surrounded by the dead, holding each other like we could anchor ourselves against the storm coming. Finally I pulled away. Collected the journal, the thumb drive, my father's letter. Evidence of conspiracy and murder and experiments that turned people into puppets. Evidence that would either save us or kill us. "What now?" I asked. Julian was already moving toward the gate, scanning the darkness for threats. "Now we find somewhere safe to review everything. Make copies, create dead man switches. Then we contact the people your father trusted and—" He stopped abruptly, one hand shooting out to grip my arm. "What?" "Lights. Coming this way." His voice was flat, urgent. "Run." Ran. Through the cemetery between headstones, following Julian's shadow as he navigated by instinct. Behind us I could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting, footsteps pounding on pavement. They'd found us. Somehow, despite the precautions and the misdirection and the careful planning, they'd tracked us here. "The back fence," Julian gasped, pointing. "There's a gap. If we can make it." Spotlight. Bright and blinding, catching us like actors on a stage. "Stop. Federal agents." A voice amplified by megaphone. "Get on the ground. Now." Julian didn't stop. He grabbed my hand and pulled me sideways between mausoleums, using the stone structures as cover. Gunshot. The crack of it echoing through the fog, impossibly loud. "They're shooting at us." I couldn't believe it. Couldn't process that this was real, that people were trying to kill us over buried evidence. "They're not federal agents," Julian said grimly. "They're private security. No rules, no accountability." Another shot. Closer. "Run." We burst through a gap in the back fence, tearing through brambles that caught and scratched. I lost my grip on the journal, heard it hit the ground behind us, but I kept the thumb drive clutched in my fist and my father's letter shoved in my pocket. The car was 100 yards away, parked in an overflow lot. It might as well have been 100 miles. More gunshots. Something whined past my ear, so close I felt the displacement of air. Julian's car came into view. He was fumbling for keys, hands shaking from adrenaline and fear and— "Julian!" I screamed his name as he stumbled, as his leg buckled beneath him. Blood. Dark stain spreading across his jeans, just above the knee. "I'm fine." But his voice was tight with pain. "Get to the car. Drive. I'm not leaving you. Asha." I got under his arm, took his weight, half-dragged him the final 30 feet to the car. He collapsed into the passenger seat while I ran around to the driver's side. Keys still in the ignition. Thank God for paranoid preparation. The engine turned over as our pursuers reached the fence line. I floored it, tires shrieking, the car fishtailing before finding purchase. In the rearview mirror, I saw muzzle flashes, saw men climbing the fence, saw our window of escape closing like a trap. But we made it. Somehow. Made it to the street, to the highway, into the fog that swallowed us completely. Julian was breathing hard. His hand pressed against the wound on his leg. Blood seeped between his fingers. "How bad?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Through and through. Missed the artery." He grimaced. "I've had worse." "That's not reassuring. We need to get off the highway. They'll have already called it in, set up roadblocks. We need—" He stopped, his face going pale. The journal. Did you get it? No. I dropped it when we ran. Fuck. The word was exhaled like a death sentence. That had everything. Names, dates, protocols. We still have the thumb drive. And my father's letter. It's not enough. Not without the journal to corroborate. He stopped, eyes going wide. They're going to find it. They're going to know exactly what we know, what we're planning. They'll move to protect their assets. Eliminate the witnesses we might contact. What witnesses? The people your father trusted. The ones I was supposed to contact. Julian fumbled for his phone. I need to warn them. Need to. His phone lit up with an incoming call. Unknown number. He answered, putting it on speaker. Yes. Mr. Voss. A woman's voice, cultured and cold. I believe you have something that belongs to us. We're willing to negotiate for its return. Who is this? Someone with a vested interest in keeping the past buried. And considerable resources to ensure that happens. Oz. You've been running for 5 years, Julian. Aren't you tired? Wouldn't you like to stop? What are you offering? Your life. Dr. Nolan's life. In exchange for the thumb drive and your silence. Another pause. It's more than you deserve, considering how much trouble you've caused. But we're prepared to be generous. Julian's hand tightened on the phone. And if I refuse? Then you'll both be dead by morning. As will everyone else your father listed as potential allies. Dr. Nolan. We have the journal now. We know who he contacted, who he trusted. We can eliminate them faster than you can warn them. Silence on the line. Just the sound of breathing, of calculation, of choices narrowing to a single point. I need time to think, Julian said finally. You have 1 hour. I'll call back with instructions. The line went dead. Julian stared at the phone like it was a snake. Then he threw it out the window. What are you doing? I demanded. They're tracking it. Everything. We're compromised. He leaned back against the seat, his face gray with pain and blood loss. We need to disappear completely. New plan, new strategy. Everything we had is burned. What about the people my father trusted? If they're still alive by morning, we'll try to contact them. If not... He stopped, closing his eyes. If not, we're truly alone. I drove into the fog, into the night, into the unknown. Julian's blood stained the passenger seat. My father's letter burned in my pocket. The thumb drive was a small weight in my fist, this tiny piece of plastic that contained either salvation or damnation. And somewhere behind us, in that cemetery full of the dead, our enemies had found the journal, had learned every name, every safe house, every contingency plan. We'd come for truth. But we'd found something worse. We'd found war. Chapter 5. The fire returns. We abandoned the car in Oakland, in a grocery store parking lot where it would blend in until morning. Julian could barely walk, his legs stiff with blood loss and pain, but he refused to go to a hospital. They'll be watching ERs, he said through gritted teeth. Looking for gunshot wounds. We go in there, we're dead. You're going to be dead anyway if we don't treat that. I got under his arm, taking his weight. Where can we go? There's a safe house. In Berkeley, near the university. One your father set up years ago before. He stumbled, nearly taking us both down. Before they knew he was involved. It might still be clean. The word that defined our entire existence now. We took a bus. Cash only, heads down, trying to look like drunk college students instead of fugitives running from a conspiracy. The other passengers ignored us with practiced urban indifference. Julian's blood soaked through the bandage I'd improvised from my shirt, but in the dim bus lighting it just looked like he'd spilled something. The safe house turned out to be a studio apartment above a Korean restaurant, accessed through a back alley entrance. Julian had a key hidden in a magnetic box under the dumpster. More paranoid preparation that was starting to seem inadequate given how easily they'd found us at the cemetery. How did they know? I asked as I helped him up the stairs. We were careful. We misdirected. How did they track us? I don't know. His voice was tight with pain and frustration. Maybe they've been monitoring the cemetery, waiting to see if anyone accessed your mother's grave. Maybe they put a tracker on the car and I missed it. Maybe. He stopped on the landing, breathing hard. Maybe we were compromised from the beginning and I was too arrogant to see it. The apartment was small and sterile. Single room with a Murphy bed, kitchenette, bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But it had supplies. First aid kit, burner phones, changes of clothes, and a stack of cash rubber-banded in the freezer. Everything needed for a quick escape. I got Julian onto the bed and finally got a good look at the wound. Through and through like he'd said, but messy. The bullet had torn through muscle, narrowly missing the femur. It needed stitches, antibiotics, probably surgery to ensure there were no fragments. I can clean it, I said, pulling out the first aid kit. But you need a real doctor. You're a real doctor. Of psychology, not emergency medicine. I took basic first aid training, not. Then it'll have to be enough. He leaned back against the wall, his face pale and sweating. Do what you can. We'll worry about infection tomorrow. I cleaned the wound with antiseptic that made him hiss through his teeth but didn't make him cry out. Control, always control. I used butterfly bandages to close the worst of it, then wrapped it in gauze tight enough to stop the bleeding but not cut off circulation. Where did you learn to do this? He asked, watching me work with those intense gray eyes. Summer volunteering at a rural clinic in Guatemala. We saw a lot of machete injuries, the occasional gunshot wound. The nurses taught me the basics. I tied off the bandage. That was before med school, before I decided trauma psychology was safer than trauma surgery. Nothing about our lives is safe. No. I sat back on my heels, looking at the blood on my hands. I suppose not. Julian reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek. You have blood here. It's yours. I know. But he wiped it away anyway, gentle despite his own pain. Thank you. For not leaving me in that cemetery. For. He stopped, something vulnerable crossing his face. For choosing me over your own safety. We're in this together now. Whether I like it or not. Do you like it? I looked at him. This man who'd appended my entire existence in 24 hours, who carried secrets about my past and photographs of a woman I used to be, who'd been shot protecting evidence that would destroy the people who destroyed my family. I don't know, I said honestly. Ask me again when we're not running for our lives. Slight smile. Fair enough. I stood, moving to the kitchenette to wash the blood from my hands. The water ran red, then pink, then clear. In the cracked mirror above the sink, I saw a stranger. Hair tangled, shirt torn and blood-stained, eyes too bright with adrenaline and fear. Not Dr. Asha Nolan, clinical psychologist. Someone else. Someone harder. Someone who'd been buried for 5 years and was clawing her way back to the surface. Tell me about her, I said, still staring at the stranger in the mirror. The woman I was before they modified me. What was she like? Julian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost reverent. She was fierce. Brilliant. Completely fearless in a way that terrified me because I knew it meant she'd sacrifice herself if she thought it would save someone she loved. He paused. She had your face, your voice. But she looked at the world differently. Like she was constantly analyzing, finding patterns, seeing connections others missed. Your father used to joke that you got his researcher brain and your mother's heart. It made you dangerous to people who wanted secrets kept. And you, I turned to face him. What was I to you? A revelation. He said it simply. I'd spent 10 years building a pharmaceutical empire, convinced I was helping people. Then I met your father and realized I'd been helping create weapons instead. It broke something in me. Made me question everything. His eyes found mine. And then you walked into my office with boxes of evidence and this look on your face. Like you'd already decided the world was evil but you were going to fight it anyway. And I thought, that's what courage actually looks like. That doesn't sound like me. It is you. It's just been sleeping. He shifted on the bed, wincing. The modification didn't erase your personality, Asha. It just suppressed the memories that shaped it. Buried the trauma that made you angry enough to fight. But it's still there. I can see it surfacing every time you make a choice the old Asha wouldn't have hesitated over. I moved back to the bed, sitting on the edge. My father's letter said you loved Emma. That she loved you. How does that fit with? I gestured between us. With whatever this is. Julian's expression went carefully neutral. It doesn't. Not cleanly. Emma and I, it was complicated. We were thrown together in a crisis, both trying to save people we cared about. We found comfort in each other. But it wasn't. He stopped, searching for words. It wasn't what this is. And what is this? I don't know. Recognition, maybe. Or just trauma bonding. Or. He reached out, his hand finding mine. Or something that started 5 years ago and got interrupted before we could figure out what it was. His thumb traced circles on my palm, and I felt the touch like electricity up my arm. I can't be her, I said quietly. Even if I recover the memories, even if I remember everything, I've lived 5 years as someone else. Changed. Grown. Become a different person. I know. So what do you want from me? The ghost of who I was. Or whoever I am now. Julian pulled me closer, until I was leaning against his uninjured side. His arm coming around me. I want you alive. That's all. Everything else, who you were, who you are, what we might be to each other, we can figure out later. If we survive. That word again. I closed my eyes, letting myself rest against him just for a moment. He was warm and solid, and his heartbeat was steady under my ear. For 5 years I'd been alone, keeping everyone at arm's length, building walls so high nothing could touch me. But Julian Voss had walked through those walls like they were smoke. The thumb drive, I said, pulling away reluctantly. We need to look at what's on it. Figure out what we have. Tomorrow. When we're rested and can think clearly. We might not have tomorrow. They gave us an hour to decide. And I threw the phone away. They can't contact us, which means we have time to plan. His hand tightened on mine. Sleep first. Review the evidence at first light. Then we decide our next move. He was right logically. But my brain was running too fast, too hot, spinning through scenarios and outcomes and the feeling that we were missing something critical. I can't sleep, I admitted. Every time I close my eyes I see. I stopped, but he knew. The fire. Yes. Julian was quiet for a moment. Then. Tell me about the dreams. The fire dreams you've been having. Every detail you remember. I looked at him, understanding where he was going. You think they're not just dreams. You think they're suppressed memories trying to surface. I think your subconscious has been fighting the modification for 5 years. Trying to tell you the truth in the only way it could. He shifted, making room. Lie down. Close your eyes. Tell me what you see. Felt like therapy. Like all the sessions I'd conducted with patients trying to process trauma. But this time I was the patient, and Julian was the therapist. And the couch was a Murphy bed in a safe house while we ran from people who wanted us dead. I lay down beside him, careful of his wounded leg. Closed my eyes. And let the fire come. It starts with lavender, I said. The smell of it, overwhelming. And there's a woman's voice, calm and clinical, asking me questions I can't quite hear. My breathing quickened. Then Emma's face. She's screaming but there's no sound. And I'm reaching for her but my hands won't move. I'm paralyzed, watching her burn and I can't. You're not paralyzed, Julian said softly. You're restrained. They had you pinned to the floor after they injected you. That's why you couldn't move. The memory shifted, clarified. I could feel the weight on my back now, the hands holding my arms, the cold floor against my cheek. Keep going, Julian urged. What else? Fire. Through the glass. Red and orange and so bright it hurts. And there's a man. My breath caught. Beating his hands against the window. Blood on the glass. And Emma inside, holding papers, and she's looking right at me through the flames and she's... Tears burned behind my closed eyelids. She's mouthing something. 3 words, over and over. What words? I opened my eyes, looked at Julian. I love you. His expression cracked just for a moment. Pain and grief and 5 years of carrying that last message. She did, he whispered. She loved you more than anything. That's why she made sure you'd forget. She didn't want you to carry the guilt of not being able to save her. But I'm carrying it anyway. Just without understanding why. Memory is cruel that way. His arm tightened around me. But it's also resilient. What you're remembering, it's fragmented, traumatic, but it's real. The lavender was the scent marker they used during conditioning. Dr. Chen's voice asking questions was part of the modification protocol. The restraint, the paralysis, watching Emma through the glass. All of it happened. How do I remember more? How do I get it all back? Carefully. In pieces. Too much too fast could trigger a psychotic break like Emma experienced. He paused. But there are techniques. Sensory triggers, guided recall, hypnotic regression. If you're willing to try. I'm willing. It could hurt. Could make things worse before they get better. I don't care. I turned to face him fully. I need to know. Need to remember her properly. Not just through these nightmare fragments. She deserves that. Julian studied my face for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. But not tonight. Tonight you need actual rest. Not controlled trauma recall. He pulled me back against his side. Sleep. I'll keep watch. You're injured. You need rest more than. I've slept enough for 5 years. Tonight I want to stay awake and make sure you're safe. There was something in his voice. A fierce protectiveness that reminded me of what my father had written. He'll try to save you. Let him. So I let myself relax against him, my head on his shoulder. His heartbeat steady in my ear. Outside, the city hummed its midnight song. Sirens and traffic and the distant sound of the BART train. Inside, we were a pocket of warmth in the darkness. 2 ghosts trying to remember how to be human. Julian. I said into the quiet. In the photograph. The one of us at the cafe. I was smiling. Was I happy? He was quiet for so long I thought he'd fallen asleep despite his promise to keep watch. You were terrified. We all were. Your sister had just told us about the program's real goals. Your father had decided to go public. And we knew they'd try to stop us. We just spent 8 hours reviewing evidence of experiments that turned people into weapons. You had every reason to be miserable. But I was smiling. But you were smiling. His hand came up, fingers threading through my hair. Because you said something I'll never forget. You said, if we're going to die trying to stop them, at least we'll die knowing we tried. That's more than most people get. And then you looked at me and you smiled like the world wasn't ending. Like hope still existed. I don't feel hopeful now. That's because you've forgotten how. But it's still in there, buried with everything else they tried to suppress. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. When this is over, when we've burned it all down and exposed everyone involved, I'm going to spend every day helping you remember how to smile like that again. That's a big promise. I've waited 5 years to keep the first one. What's a few more years for the second? I closed my eyes again, letting his warmth seep into me. The fire dreams were still there, lurking at the edges of consciousness. But for the first time in 5 years, they felt less like nightmares and more like memories. Painful, traumatic, but real. And real was something I could work with. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the window and Julian was shaking me awake. His face tight with urgency. We have to go, he said. Now. I sat up, disoriented. What? Why? He gestured to the window. Below in the alley I could see black SUVs. Men in tactical gear, moving with military precision. They'd found us. How? I demanded, already moving, grabbing our supplies. How did they find us so fast? The thumb drive. Julian was pulling on his jacket, favoring his injured leg but moving fast. It must have a tracker embedded. They let us think we'd escaped so they could follow us here, see if we'd lead them to other safe houses. I stared at the small piece of plastic that had cost us everything. Our one piece of evidence, and it had been compromised from the start. We have to destroy it, I said. No. We upload it first, send it everywhere. News outlets, government watchdogs, every contact your father listed. Julian was already at the laptop, fingers flying over keys. They want to contain this. We make it impossible to contain. They'll be up here in seconds. Then by me 60 seconds. He didn't look up from the screen. There's a gun in the nightstand. I hope you know how to use it. I'd never fired a gun in my life. But I opened the nightstand anyway, found the cold weight of metal, checked the chamber the way I'd seen in movies. Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots moving fast. Julian's fingers kept typing. 45 seconds. The door handle rattled. Then a voice. We know you're in there. Come out peacefully and no one gets hurt. They're lying, Julian said. They can't let us live. 30 seconds. I aimed the gun at the door, my hands shaking. I don't think I can do this. Yes, you can. The woman you were before, she could. I'm not her. Asha. He looked at me then, and his eyes held absolute certainty. You are exactly her. You always were. You just forgot for a while. The door exploded inward, splintering around the lock. And I fired. The recoil shocked me, nearly knocked me backward. But the gun fired, the bullet hit something, someone, and I heard a scream. Done. Julian slammed the laptop shut. It's uploaded. Every news outlet, every watchdog organization, 20 different servers. They can't stop it now. Back door. I was already moving, pulling him toward the bathroom window that looked out onto a fire escape. More men in the doorway. Gunfire. The wall behind us exploded in plaster and wood fragments. We went through the window in a controlled fall, landing on the fire escape with a crash that made Julian cry out in pain. But he didn't stop moving. Down the ladder, into the alley, past dumpsters and delivery trucks. A van screeched to a halt in front of us. Not black like the tactical SUVs. White and unmarked, driven by a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Get in, she shouted. Your father sent me. Could have been a trap. Probably was a trap. But we were out of options and out of time. We dove into the van. It took off before the door was even closed, tires shrieking. Who are you? I demanded. The woman glanced in the rearview mirror, and I saw recognition in her face. I'm Dr. Margaret Wells. I worked with your father on the original ethics review for the memory modification program. I was one of the people he contacted before he died. You were in the journal. The one they found. Yes. And I've been running since last night, same as you. They've been systematically eliminating everyone your father trusted. She took a corner fast, checking mirrors constantly. But they made one mistake. They assumed we'd all be easy targets. They assumed we wouldn't fight back. The upload. Julian started. I saw it. It's already spreading. News outlets are picking it up, fact-checkers are verifying. By noon, this will be the biggest story in the country. Margaret's expression was grim satisfaction. They wanted to keep this quiet. We're going to make it so loud they can't ignore it. I looked at Julian, saw the same exhausted relief on his face that I felt. We'd done it. Exposed the conspiracy. Uploaded the evidence. But we weren't safe. Not yet. Not until everyone involved was arrested, prosecuted, destroyed. Where are we going? I asked. Margaret's eyes met mine in the mirror. To finish this. Your father had one more safeguard, one more piece of evidence he didn't trust to digital storage. He told me if anything happened to him, I should take you there. Where? The place where it all started. Where they first developed the memory modification protocols. She took another turn, heading toward the Bay Bridge. We're going back to the fire. Chapter 6. The Last Confession. The Voss Pharmaceuticals building stood like a burned skeleton against the San Francisco skyline. 5 years had passed since the fire, but the structure had never been demolished. Legal disputes, insurance battles, environmental concerns about toxic residue. The excuses kept piling up while the building remained, a monument to corporate scandal and death. The lower floors were sealed, the windows boarded, the perimeter fenced with warnings about structural instability and hazardous materials. But someone had been maintaining it. The fence was too new, the locks too expensive. This wasn't abandonment. This was preservation. "They're still using it," Julian said, staring up at the building as Margaret parked the van 3 blocks away. "The fire destroyed the lab, but the rest of the structure is sound. They just let everyone think it was condemned while they continued the research. Margaret killed the engine. Your father suspected as much. That's why he came back here 2 weeks before he died. He broke in, documented everything, and hid the evidence somewhere inside." She handed me a small notebook, pages covered in my father's handwriting. "He left me this. Instructions on where to look." I flipped through the pages, recognizing his meticulous note-taking style. Architectural diagrams, access codes that were probably outdated, a map marking a location on the 4th floor. His old office, with a note, under the floorboards where Catherine used to hide her birthday presents. My mother's name, a memory so specific, so intimate only I would understand. "He knew they might kill him," I said quietly. "He was preparing for it. Making sure I'd be able to find this, even if he wasn't there to show me. He loved you very much." Margaret's voice was gentle. "He talked about you constantly. About how brilliant you were. How much you reminded him of your mother. About how he'd failed to protect Emma, but he wouldn't fail to protect you. He did fail." The words came out bitter. "They modified me, made me forget, turned me into someone else. But you came back. You're here, you're fighting, you're exactly who he believed you could be." She glanced at Julian. "Can you walk?" "I can manage." But his face was gray with pain and exhaustion. The wound was seeping again, the bandage soaked through. "You need a hospital," I said for the 100th time. "After we finish this first." His jaw set with determination. I didn't spend 5 years running just to die in an emergency room before seeing this through. Margaret opened a weapons case in the back of the van. 3 handguns, extra ammunition, tactical flashlights. The security inside will be minimal. They can't risk drawing attention with heavy presence. But they'll have surveillance, probably a small armed team. We go in fast, get to the 4th floor, retrieve whatever your father hid, and get out. And if they're waiting for us, yes, then we've already uploaded the evidence. They've lost the information war. Killing us now just makes them look guilty." She loaded a clip with practiced efficiency. "But that won't stop them from trying." We moved through back alleys and service roads, approaching the building from the side where the fire damage was worst. The chain-link fence had a gap, bolt cutters, recent, probably Margaret's preparation. Through it, past warning signs and caution tape that fluttered in the wind. The side entrance was secured with a keypad lock. Julian pulled out a small device, electronic lockpick, and within 30 seconds the door clicked open. Inside, the building smelled like ash and chemicals and time. The main corridors were intact, just dirty and abandoned looking. But you could see the fire damage in the walls, the smoke stains climbing toward the ceiling, the places where heat had warped metal and cracked concrete. "The stairwell's this way," Margaret whispered, leading us deeper into the structure. "The elevators are disabled. We climb." 4 flights of stairs with Julian struggling on his wounded leg. I stayed close, ready to catch him if he fell. By the 3rd floor he was breathing hard, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold air. "Almost there," I encouraged. "Just 1 more floor." The 4th floor was less damaged than the lower levels, far enough from the fire's origin to escape the worst of it. The hallway stretched into darkness, office doors standing open like empty mouths. Julian stopped in front of one door, the nameplate still visible despite the soot. Julian Vaso. Your father spent a lot of time here, he said quietly. We'd work late, going through evidence, planning how to expose the program. He'd talk about you and Emma. About how he wished he could protect you both from what was coming. He tried. In his way. I pushed open the door. The office was frozen in time. Desks still covered in papers, now yellowed and water-damaged. Bookshelves lined with pharmaceutical texts and research journals. A photo on the wall. Much younger Julian shaking hands with some politician at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, back when Voss Pharmaceuticals was respected, legitimate. Where did your mother hide presents? Margaret asked, already moving furniture, checking for loose floorboards. I closed my eyes, reaching for a memory that felt distant, dreamlike. Under the window. She'd pry up the boards near the radiator pipe, hide things there, replace the boards so carefully you couldn't see the seam. We moved to the window. Julian dropped to his knees despite the pain, running his fingers along the floorboards. Here. This section sounds hollow. Margaret handed him a crowbar from her pack. She'd come prepared for everything. He wedged it into the gap and leveraged up. The boards came free with a crack that seemed too loud in the silence. Underneath was a metal document box, fireproof and waterproof, sealed with my father's fingerprint lock. I pressed my thumb to the scanner, hardly breathing. Opened. Inside. A hard drive, a stack of photographs, and a sealed envelope addressed to me in my father's handwriting. Different from the cemetery letter. This one older, the paper yellowed. This was written before he died, I said, checking the date. 2 weeks before. Right after he came here. I opened it with shaking hands. My dearest Asha, if you're reading this, then I'm dead, and you've somehow remembered enough to find this hiding place. I'm so proud of you. I'm also so very sorry. The hard drive contains video evidence of the memory modification program's true purpose. Not PTSD treatment. Not therapeutic intervention. Weaponization. The military contractors who funded this weren't interested in healing soldiers. They wanted to create them. To take enemy combatants and reprogram them as assets. To create false witnesses for war crimes tribunals. To erase knowledge of atrocities from the minds of those who committed them. Emma discovered this by accident during one of her treatment sessions. She saw files she wasn't supposed to see. And instead of being frightened, she got angry. She demanded to know the truth. Dr. Chen panicked and tried to modify her memory to make her forget what she'd seen. But the protocols were experimental, unstable. Instead of suppressing the memory, it fractured Emma's psyche entirely. That's when she called me. When she told me everything. When I realized the program I'd been consulting on was a weapon disguised as medicine. Julian helped me try to stop it. He was horrified by what his company had been used for. We gathered evidence, prepared to go public. But they were faster. They came for Emma first, tried to silence her permanently. She knew they were coming. That's why she led them to the research facility. She wanted to destroy the evidence even if it cost her life. And it did cost her life. Cost her everything. They tried to modify your memory too, Asha. Make you forget what you'd seen, what you knew. But something went wrong. The dosage was too high, or your psychology was too resilient, or God was merciful for once. The modification didn't take completely. Fragments remained, buried deep. Your dreams, your nightmares, your inexplicable fear of pharmaceutical companies. All of it was your mind fighting to remember. I've spent 3 years documenting everything. Building a case that can't be ignored or suppressed. When this evidence becomes public, the program will be destroyed. Everyone involved will be prosecuted. Justice will be served. But Asha, you need to understand something crucial. Dr. Sarah Chen didn't act alone. She was following orders from someone higher up. Someone who's been orchestrating this program from the beginning. Someone with the resources and connections to make people disappear, to falsify records, to kill anyone who threatens them. That person is. The letter ended there. Torn off mid-sentence. like he'd been interrupted while writing, or like someone had deliberately removed the name. "He was going to tell you who was running the program," Julian said, reading over my shoulder. "But someone got to the evidence first, removed the identification. Who knew about this hiding place?" Margaret demanded. "Who else could have accessed it?" "No one. Just me and David." Julian's face went pale. "Unless," a voice from the doorway, "unless someone was listening when you discussed it." We spun around. Dr. Sarah Chen stood in the entrance, flanked by two men in tactical gear. She looked older than in the surveillance footage. Grayer, thinner, with a kind of exhaustion that came from years of carrying secrets. But her eyes were cold, calculating, and the gun in her hand was steady. "I've been waiting for you to come back," she said. "All of you. Together, bringing me the evidence I need to clean up this mess." "You?" I stared at her. "You've been orchestrating this? The whole program?" "No. I'm just a scientist who made a terrible mistake." She moved into the room, her escorts fanning out to block the exits. I thought I was developing medicine. By the time I realized what they were really building, I was in too deep. They had my research, my reputation, my career. They owned me. "So you killed for them. Covered up the experiments. Modified memories. Destroyed lives." "I did what I had to do to survive." No apology in her voice. Just cold pragmatism. "Emma would have exposed everything. Your father was going to destroy decades of research. And you." She looked at me with something that might have been regret. "You were supposed to forget. The modification should have worked completely. I don't understand why you're still remembering." "Because some things are too important to forget," I said. "Because my sister died for the truth, and I won't let that be for nothing." Sarah's expression hardened. "Give me the hard drive. And the thumb drive you uploaded from. I need to know how much evidence exists, where else copies might be stored." "We uploaded everything," Julian said. "It's already public. News outlets, government agencies, watchdog organizations. You can't contain this." "I can try. I can claim the evidence was fabricated, that you're both delusional. I can use the same memory modification techniques to create witnesses who'll testify you invented everything." She raised the gun slightly. "Or I can kill you right now and make it look like a murder-suicide." Two traumatized individuals, unable to cope with the anniversary of the fire, taking their own lives in the building where it all began. "No one will believe that," Margaret said from behind us. "Too convenient, too neat. People are already asking questions. Killing us makes you look guilty. Then I'll just have to live with looking guilty." Sarah's finger moved to the trigger. "I've lived with worse." "Wait." Julian stepped forward, putting himself between the gun and me. "You want to know why the modification didn't work on Asha? Why the memories keep surfacing?" Sarah paused. "Why?" "Because you used the wrong trigger. The lavender scent, the structured protocols, they work on traumatic memories, on experiences people want to forget. But you can't suppress love." His voice went soft. "Every time you tried to make Asha forget Emma, you were asking her to forget the most important person in her life. And love doesn't work that way. It finds ways to persist, to surface, to remind you what matters." Poetic. Also irrelevant. But Sarah's hand wavered slightly. "It's not irrelevant. It's the fundamental flaw in your program. You can't weaponize memory without destroying what makes us human. And eventually, humanity fights back." Julian glanced at me, and in his eyes I saw something that looked like goodbye. "That's what Emma understood. That's why she burned the lab. Not to destroy the evidence, but to destroy the illusion that you could control human memory without consequences. She was psychotic, delusional. She was the sanest person in the building." He turned back to Sarah. "And I'm done letting her death be for nothing." He moved fast, faster than should have been possible with his injury, launched himself at Sarah, grabbing for the gun. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the weapon discharging with a crack that made my ears ring. Margaret pulled out her own gun, firing at the tactical escorts. I dove for the hard drive, clutching it against my chest as gunfire erupted around me. Julian and Sarah were struggling on the floor, the gun between them, both hands wrapped around it. A second shot muffled by their bodies. Julian went still. "No!" I screamed, trying to reach him, but Margaret grabbed me, pulled me back. "We have to go. Now!" She was firing methodically, driving the escorts back into the hallway. But I couldn't move. Could only watch as Julian's body slumped sideways, blood spreading across the floor. Sarah stood, the gun in her hand, her expression emotionless. "I'm sorry it had to be this way. I truly am." Then the building shook. Not earthquake, something else. Something that started deep in the structure and rippled upward with a sound like thunder. "What?" Sarah stumbled, grabbing the desk for support. "Charges," Margaret said grimly. "Your father set them years ago, dead man's switch. If this building was ever accessed by unauthorized personnel, if certain protocols were triggered, another explosion closer, it would ensure no evidence survived. He's destroying the building." I stared at her in horror. "We're inside. Then we run." Margaret grabbed my arm, hauling me toward the door. I looked back at Julian, at his body lying motionless on the floor. At Sarah, who was staring at the ceiling as cracks spread across the plaster. "Come on!" Margaret shouted, and I ran. Through the corridor, down the stairwell as the building groaned around us. Explosions above and below, timed with precision to bring down the entire structure. The ceiling was collapsing, debris raining down. We burst out of the side entrance just as the building imploded. A roar like the end of the world, glass and concrete and steel folding in on itself. The ground shook. The shockwave threw us forward, and I tucked and rolled, clutching the hard drive against my chest like it was the only thing that mattered. When the dust cleared, the Voss Pharmaceuticals building was gone. Just rubble and twisted metal and the rising smoke of another fire, 5 years after the first. I stared at the ruins, at the place where Julian had died, where Emma had died 5 years ago, where my father had tried to expose the truth before they silenced him. All of them gone. All of them sacrificed for evidence that might not even be enough to stop the people who'd created this nightmare. Margaret pulled me to my feet. "We have to move. Emergency services will be here soon, and we need to be gone before they arrive." He saved me. My voice sounded distant, disconnected. Julian put himself between me and the gun. He kept his promise to your sister. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "He saved you. Don't make his sacrifice meaningless by getting caught now." Sirens in the distance. Fire trucks, police, ambulances racing toward the smoke. We disappeared into the crowd of onlookers gathering on nearby streets. Just 2 more people shocked by the explosion. Just 2 more faces that would be forgotten in the chaos. But I would never forget. Julian Voss, the man I'd blamed, the man who'd carried my sister's dying words for 5 years, the man who'd given up everything to keep a promise, was gone. And I was left carrying the evidence he'd died protecting. The hard drive felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Like it contained the ghosts of everyone who'd been destroyed by the program. Like it was the only thing standing between justice and oblivion. Margaret guided me to a different van. Another safe-house vehicle, another layer of preparation. "Where do we go now?" asked numbly. "To the media. To the authorities. To everyone who needs to see what's on that drive." She started the engine. "Your father's evidence, combined with what Julian uploaded, is enough to destroy the program. But we need to make sure it reaches the right people, that it can't be suppressed or discredited." Sarah Chen. "She's dead, isn't she? In that building. Most likely. Her and anyone else inside." Margaret's jaw tightened. "Which means they'll try to pin everything on her. Make her the scapegoat, claim she was acting alone. We can't let that happen. My father's letter said there was someone higher up. Someone orchestrating everything. Then we find them. We use the evidence to trace the money, the orders, the chain of command. And we burn them down the way they burned down your family. She glanced at me. Can you do that? Can you see this through to the end? I thought about Emma, walking into fire to destroy evidence. About my father, hiding truth in floorboards and letters. About Julian, throwing himself at a gun to give me time to escape. All of them sacrificed. All of them counting on me to finish what they'd started. Yes, I said. I can do that. Good. Margaret's expression was fierce. Because this isn't over. Not until everyone involved pays for what they did. The van merged into traffic, carrying us away from the smoke and sirens and the ruins of another burned building. But this time I wasn't running. I was hunting. And I would make sure that everyone who'd destroyed my family would burn. Not with fire. With truth. Chapter 7. Resurrection. 3 months later, I sat in a congressional hearing room and told the truth. The chamber was packed. Senators, journalists, survivors of the memory modification program, families of those who died. Cameras broadcast every word to millions watching at home. The evidence we'd gathered was projected on screens behind me. Surveillance footage, financial records, emails, and the hard drive contents that had survived 2 fires. I was the star witness. The survivor. The psychologist who'd uncovered a government conspiracy to weaponize human memory. The woman who'd lost everything and refused to stay silent. Dr. Nolan. Senator Patricia Kimball leaned forward, her expression grave. In your professional opinion, how many people were subjected to unauthorized memory modification? Based on the documentation we recovered, at least 300 confirmed test subjects over a 5-year period. But the program had been running for 7 years before my sister's death, which suggests the actual number could be over 1,000. Kept my voice steady, clinical. This was the performance I'd practiced with Margaret. Controlled, credible, impossible to dismiss. The majority were military personnel, but approximately 30% were civilians recruited through pharmaceutical trials. And these modifications, they were permanent. In most cases, yes. The protocols were designed to suppress memories so deeply that recovery was unlikely without targeted intervention. Some subjects exhibited breakthrough symptoms, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, psychological distress, but without therapeutic support, most simply lived with false memories for the rest of their lives. Senator Kimball's jaw tightened. Including you. Including me. For 5 years, I believed a fabricated timeline of events surrounding my sister's death. I lost memories of my relationship with my father, my sister's final months, and my own role in attempting to expose the program. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. The people who developed this technology didn't just modify memories. They stole identities, relationships, entire lives. The hearing room erupted in murmurs. The senator called for order. And the individual responsible for orchestrating this program. Have they been identified? This was the moment Margaret and I had been building toward. 3 months of investigation, following money trails and encrypted communications. 3 months of watching the government scramble to contain the scandal, to identify scapegoats and protect higher-ups. But we'd found them. The name my father had been trying to write before someone tore it from his letter. Yes, I said clearly. Deputy Director Marcus Hall of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. He authorized the funding, approved the protocols, and ordered the elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the program. Including my father, Dr. David Nolan. The room exploded. Journalists shouting questions. Cameras flashing. Security trying to maintain order. Marcus Hall, who'd been sitting in the gallery, confident that his decades of careful planning would protect him, stood abruptly, his face pale with rage or fear or both. "This is slander," he shouted. "I've dedicated my life to protecting this country. You can't." "We have emails," I said calmly, pulling out a folder. "Sent from your personal account to Dr. Sarah Chen, authorizing the silencing of whistleblowers. We have financial records showing payments to the tactical teams that killed my father. We have testimony from program participants who can identify you as the person who approved their modifications. I met his eyes across the room. You can't hide behind national security anymore. The truth is public now. 2 federal marshals moved toward Hall. He ran, tried to anyway, but they caught him before he reached the exit. The cameras captured everything. His arrest, his shouting, his desperate attempts to maintain innocence even as the evidence destroyed him. Should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt hollow. Because the person I most wanted to share this moment with was dead. Buried under rubble in a building that had collapsed 3 months ago. Died keeping a promise to a woman he'd loved in a different way than he'd loved me, but loved nonetheless. Julian Voss had given everything to reach this moment. And he'd never know that we'd won. The hearing adjourned for the day. Margaret found me in the hallway outside, surrounded by journalists shouting questions. No comment, she said firmly, steering me away from the crowd. Dr. Nolan has said everything she needs to say today. If you want more information, wait for the committee's final report. We escaped to a waiting car. Another anonymous vehicle, another layer of security that had become second nature. The driver pulled away from the Capitol building, and I finally let myself exhale. You did well, Margaret said. Better than well. You were exactly what we needed. Credible, composed, devastating. Hall's lawyers are already scrambling to cut a deal. Will he get prison time? If there's any justice left in this world. Her expression hardened. But even if he doesn't, his career is over. His reputation destroyed. Everything he built, burned down because he underestimated a group of people who refused to forget. I stared out the window at Washington, D.C. passing by. Monuments to democracy and justice that suddenly felt less hollow than they had 3 months ago. Maybe the system was broken. Maybe people like Marcus Hall got away with crimes for decades before anyone stopped them. But they didn't always get away. Sometimes the truth caught up. Sometimes the victims fought back. Sometimes the ghosts won. I need to visit him, I said quietly. Before I leave the city. Margaret didn't ask who I meant. Just gave the driver an address in Arlington. The cemetery was smaller than the one in Colma. More intimate. Arlington National Cemetery for those who'd served the country. Who'd been deemed worthy of honor and remembrance. Julian Voss hadn't been military, but Margaret had pulled strings, called in favors. He died fighting a war, she'd argued. Just not the kind the Pentagon acknowledges. They'd given him a plot in a quiet corner, under a maple tree that was starting to turn red with autumn. The headstone was simple. Julian Alexander Voss 1987 to 2025. He kept his promise. Chosen those words. 3 months ago, standing in Margaret's safe house with funeral arrangements spread across the table, trying to summarize a life I'd only known for 48 hours. But those 48 hours had been enough. Had shown me who he was underneath the scars and guilt and 5 years of running. Had shown me the man Emma trusted, the man my father worked with, the man who'd spent half a decade trying to keep a promise to a dying woman. The man I might have loved if we'd had time. I knelt in front of the headstone, touching the carved letters. We did it, I said softly. Marcus Hall was arrested. The program's being shut down. Everyone involved is being prosecuted or investigated. The survivors are getting therapy, compensation, help rebuilding their lives. My voice cracked. You died for this. All of you, Emma, my father, you. And I just wanted you to know it wasn't for nothing. The promise you made to her, you kept it. You saved me. And I used that to save everyone else. The wind rustled through the maple leaves, carrying the smell of autumn and change. I'm leaving tomorrow. Going back to California, starting over. Margaret offered me a position at a research institute, studying memory recovery in trauma survivors, helping people undo what the program did to them. I wiped my eyes. I think Emma would have liked that. Using what happened to us to help others. Making something good from all this horror. A bird landed on the headstone, regarding me with black eyes that seemed almost knowing. I wish I remembered you better. Wish I could recall those 3 days before the fire, understand what we were to each other. But maybe it's enough to know that you were willing to die for me. That someone saw who I used to be and spent 5 years trying to give that person back to me. I pressed my palm against the cold granite. Thank you. For everything. For not giving up when it would have been easier. For finding me. For being terrible at dying, apparently. I spun around so fast I nearly fell. Julian Voss stood 10 feet away, leaning on a cane. His face thinner and scarred but unmistakably alive. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only stare at this ghost-made flesh. This impossible resurrection. How? My voice failed. I tried again. You were dead. Saw you. The building collapsed and you were inside and I was inside. In critical condition, barely alive. But Margaret's team got me out before the final collapse. He limped closer, favoring the leg that had been shot. I spent 6 weeks in a medically induced coma while doctors tried to piece me back together. Another 6 weeks in physical therapy learning to walk again. Margaret thought it was safer to let everyone believe I died, including you, until we knew whether I'd survive. She knew. All this time, she knew you were alive. She knew. He stopped a few feet away, as if uncertain whether I'd welcome him closer. I'm sorry. I know it was cruel letting you grieve. But if the people we were fighting had known I survived, they would have come for me. And by extension come for you. It was safer. I closed the distance between us and hit him. Open palm against his chest. Not hard enough to really hurt, but enough to express the fury and relief and grief-turned joy that was tearing through me. You let me think you were dead. The words came out as half-sob, half-shout. I mourned you. I sat through a funeral with an empty casket and a folded flag and a chaplain talking about sacrifice. And you were alive. I know. I'm sorry. He caught my wrists gently as I tried to hit him again. Asha, I'm sorry. But I couldn't risk them finding me. Couldn't risk you giving something away if you knew I was alive. The performance had to be real. Performance. I yanked my hands free. You think this was a performance? You think grief is something I can just... No. His voice went soft, devastated. I think you're the strongest person I've ever met. And I think you carried the weight of 3 deaths for 3 months while exposing a conspiracy that powerful people wanted buried. And I think you're angry, and you have every right to be. I stared at him, this man who'd died and come back, who'd let me believe he was gone while he healed in secret. The anger was real. The betrayal was real. But so was the overwhelming relief that he was standing here, alive, real, not just a memory I'd have to carry forever. I hate you, I whispered. I know. I hate that you're alive and I'm furious and grateful and I don't know what to feel anymore. That's fair. Slight, careful smile. I've had 6 weeks to process being alive. You've had about 30 seconds. Take your time. How long were you planning to stay dead? Until Marcus Hall was arrested and we were sure no other threats remained. Margaret thought. He paused. I watched the hearing. On closed-circuit feed from the safe house where I've been recovering. I saw you testify. Saw you destroy him with nothing but evidence and truth. You were magnificent. Don't. I held up a hand. Don't try to make this better with compliments. You owed me the truth. You owed me. I owed you your safety. Which meant letting you believe I was gone. His expression was earnest, pleading. If you'd known, if you'd shown any sign that I was alive, they would have figured it out. They would have used you to find me. And I couldn't let that happen. Not after Emma, not after your father. I couldn't let them take you too. The reference to Emma cut through my anger. 'Cause he was right. If Marcus Hall's people had known Julian survived, they would have leveraged that knowledge against me. Would have used my hope as a weapon. Sometimes the cruelest mercy was letting someone believe the worst. So what now? I asked, exhausted suddenly. You're alive. The conspiracy's exposed. Marcus Hall's arrested. What happens to us? I don't know. Julian shifted his weight, the cane supporting him. I'm not the man I was before the fire. The injuries, the coma, the months of recovery. I'm different. Slower. More fragile. He gestured at the cane. Not exactly the person you knew for those 48 hours. I'm not the person you knew either. I'm not the woman from before my memory was modified. And I'm not the terrified psychologist you found in that monastery. I moved closer, looking up at him. I'm someone new. Someone built from fragments of both. Then maybe we're both different. His free hand came up, hovering near my face like he wasn't sure he had permission to touch. Maybe we need to start over. Meet each other as who we are now, not who we were. I thought about the last 3 months. The grief, the anger, the determination to see justice done. Thought about standing in front of Congress and telling the truth, knowing Julian would never see it. Thought about the hollow victory of destroying Marcus Hall without being able to share it with the person who'd made it possible. Starting over means you don't get to keep the history, I said. No photographs from 5 years ago. No memories of who I used to be. You get me as I am now, and nothing else. That's all I want. His thumb brushed my cheek, and the touch sent electricity through me just like it had in the car, in the safe house, in every moment before I thought I'd lost him. The woman you are now is extraordinary. Fierce and brilliant and more than I deserve. You're right. You don't deserve me. But I was leaning into his touch despite the words. You let me think you were dead. That's not something I forgive easily. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for a chance. His forehead rested against mine. I kept my promise to Emma. Saved you. Can you give me the chance to keep a new promise? One I'm making to you, not your sister. What promise? That I'll spend however long I have left helping you remember how to smile, how to be happy, how to trust that not everything good gets destroyed by fire. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'll help you rebuild, Asha. All the parts they tried to erase. And I'll do it honestly this time. No secrets, no lies. No letting you believe I'm gone to keep you safe. I pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. Smoke gray like the ashes of everything we'd survived. If you ever let me think you're dead again, I will actually kill you. Smile genuine this time. Noted. And you're taking me to dinner. Proper date. Not running from conspiracies or hiding in safe houses. Normal, boring, civilian dinner. I can do that. And you're going to tell me everything. All the memories from those 3 days before the fire. Every conversation, every moment, everything I lost. I want it back, even if it's just through your telling. That might take a while. Good. I kissed him then, properly this time. Not desperate like in the car. Not grief-stricken like at the cemetery. Just a kiss that meant beginning. Starting over. Choosing to trust despite every reason not to. He kissed me back carefully. Like I was something precious he'd almost lost and couldn't quite believe he'd gotten back. When we broke apart, both breathing hard, he smiled. Should we feel guilty? He asked. Kissing in a cemetery, in front of my fake grave? Probably. I looked at the headstone with its lie of a death date. But Emma would have found this hilarious. You know she would have. She would have made so many jokes about resurrection and phoenix metaphors. She would have demanded to be my maid of honor if this goes anywhere, just to prove she called it 5 years ago. Julian went still. Is that, are you? I'm not proposing. I laughed despite everything. I'm just saying my dead sister would have been incredibly smug about being right. She usually was. He pulled me closer, careful of his injuries. God, I missed this. Missed you. Even when you didn't remember me. Even when you looked at me like a stranger, I missed the feeling of you seeing me. I see you now. I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Steady, alive, real. And I'm choosing not to lose you again. I'm choosing the same thing. We stood there in the autumn afternoon, 2 ghosts who'd refused to stay dead, holding each other in front of a tombstone that lied about the end. Somewhere above us, I imagined Emma laughing. Somewhere in the wind, I felt my father's approval. And somewhere in the space between memory and truth, between who I'd been and who I was becoming, I felt something that might have been hope. Or might have been love. Or might have been both. Chapter 8. The Woman in the Glass. 6 months after the hearing, I stood in front of a full-length mirror and didn't recognize myself. Not in the way I hadn't recognized the stranger in the safe house bathroom. This was different. This was recognition of someone I'd been before, someone I was becoming again, someone entirely new synthesized from both versions. The woman in the mirror had my face but different eyes. Clearer, sharper, less haunted. She wore a simple navy dress for the occasion, professional but not armor. Her hair was down instead of pulled back in the severe bun Dr. Asha Nolan had favored. She looked like someone who'd walked through fire and decided to keep the scars instead of hiding them. "You ready?" Julian's voice came from the doorway of our apartment, the one we'd chosen together 3 months ago, in Berkeley near the university. Close enough to the research institute where I worked but far enough from the past to feel like a new beginning. Almost. I turned from the mirror. "How do I look?" He moved into the room, still using the cane but with more confidence now. Physical therapy had helped, but the limp would be permanent. A reminder of the price paid for truth. "Like someone about to change a lot of lives," he said. "And maybe a little terrified. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who knows what to look for." He pulled me into his arms, careful and warm. We'd been living together for 2 months, learning each other's routines and boundaries. Learning how to be a couple built on honesty instead of crisis. "But you've testified before Congress, exposed a government conspiracy, and survived 2 fires. I think you can handle a book launch." A book. The Glass Confession. Memory, truth, and the weaponization of the mind. 6 months of work, condensing everything we'd learned into a manuscript that was part memoir, part exposé, part psychological analysis of how memory modification affected survivors. It had been Margaret's idea. "People need to understand what was done," she'd said. "Not just the facts but the human cost. You're uniquely positioned to tell that story." So I'd written it. Every painful detail of discovering my sister's death was a lie. My memories fabricated. My entire identity constructed by people who wanted to control me. I'd written about Emma's bravery, my father's sacrifice, Julian's 5-year quest to keep a promise. I'd written about the survivors still struggling to reclaim their real memories, about the families destroyed by a program that treated human minds like software to be rewritten. And I'd written about hope, about resistance, about the fact that love and truth persisted even when someone tried to erase them. The book had been published 2 weeks ago. Already a bestseller. Already being used in congressional debates about memory research ethics. Already changing laws about pharmaceutical trials and government oversight. Tonight was the official launch event at a bookstore near campus. Readings, Q&A, book signings. The kind of public exposure that would have terrified Dr. Asha Nolan 6 months ago. But I wasn't her anymore. What if they ask about the memories I still can't recover? I said against Julian's shoulder. The gaps that therapy hasn't been able to fill. Then you tell them the truth. That some things may be lost forever. And that's part of the tragedy of what was done to you. His hand rubbed circles on my back. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be honest about the questions. We'd been doing memory recovery work for 5 months now. Careful, structured sessions with a therapist who specialized in trauma and recovered memory syndrome. Some things had surfaced. Fragments of conversations with my father, glimpses of the 3 days before the fire, sensory details that confirmed Julian's stories. But other things remained lost. The exact moment I'd fallen for Julian the first time. Emma's last words to me before the fire. The specifics of how my father had planned to expose the program. Dr. Sarah Winters, my therapist, said that was normal. The modification wasn't designed to be reversible, she'd explained. Some neural pathways were damaged permanently. You may never recover everything. But what matters is building a coherent narrative from what remains. So that's what I'd done. Built a story from fragments and photographs and Julian's memories. Built an identity that honored who I'd been while accepting who I'd become. built a life that felt real for the first time in 5 years. The bookstore was packed. I recognized some faces from the congressional hearings, survivors of the program, journalists who'd covered the scandal, academics interested in memory research. But most were strangers, people who'd read the advance copies and wanted to hear the story directly from someone who'd lived it. Julian sat in the front row, Margaret beside him. They'd become unlikely friends during his recovery, bonded by shared determination to see justice served. She'd retired from active research after the hearings, focusing instead on advocacy work for program survivors. I took my place behind the podium, the bookstore's owner introducing me with glowing words about courage and truth. Then she handed me the microphone, and it was just me and an audience waiting to hear about horror and hope in equal measure. "Thank you all for coming," I began. 6 months ago, I stood in front of Congress and told a story about conspiracy, murder, and the weaponization of human memory. Tonight, I want to tell a different story. One about the people who refused to let that weapon work. About my sister, who walked into fire to protect evidence. About my father, who spent his last years documenting truth even though he knew it might get him killed. And about a man who kept a promise to a dying woman for 5 years, even when keeping that promise meant sacrificing everything. I found Julian's eyes in the audience. He smiled, and I felt that familiar electricity, recognition, attraction, the feeling of being truly seen. But most of all, I want to talk about memory itself. What it means, what it costs, what happens when someone tries to take it away. Paused, gathering my thoughts. For 5 years, I lived with fabricated memories. I believed a false timeline of events, mourned losses I couldn't fully understand, and felt like I was sleepwalking through someone else's life. The people who modified my memory thought they were protecting their secrets. What they actually did was create a resistance they never anticipated. Because memory isn't just data storage. It's identity. It's love. It's the accumulated weight of every experience that makes us who we are. And when you try to erase that, something fights back. Not always consciously. Sometimes just in dreams, in nightmares, in the feeling that something essential is missing. My sister understood this. That's why she destroyed the research facility. Not just to eliminate evidence, but to eliminate the illusion that memory could be controlled without consequences. She knew that truth persists. That love finds ways to surface even when it's been buried. I opened my book to a marked page. I'd like to read a passage about the night I first started remembering. The night a man I'd been taught to hate walked into the facility where I worked and told me my entire life was a lie. The reading took 20 minutes. By the end, several people in the audience were crying. The Q&A session was gentle, respectful. People asked about the recovery process, about how survivors could access resources, about what changes were being made to prevent this from happening again. One woman in her 30s raised her hand. "How do you forgive yourself? For the things you did while your memories were modified. For not saving your sister when you had the chance." Question hit hard. I'd asked myself the same thing 1,000 times. "I don't know if I do forgive myself," I said honestly. Some days I can accept that I was a victim of circumstances beyond my control. Other days I feel like I should have fought harder, seen through the lies, saved Emma despite the modification. Took a breath. But my therapist reminded me of something important. Guilt can be appropriate and still be useless. I can acknowledge that I wish things had been different while also accepting that I did the best I could with the awareness I had at the time. That's not forgiveness exactly. It's just making peace with complexity. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. I was part of the program too. One of the military test subjects. I did things I can't remember, hurt people while they'd modified my memories. The guilt is..." She stopped, unable to continue. I stepped away from the podium, moved down into the audience, and took her hands. "It's not your fault. The people who did this to you, who turned you into a weapon without your consent, they're the ones who bear responsibility. You're a survivor. You're here, you're fighting to recover your real self. That's enough." She collapsed against me, sobbing. I held her while the audience watched in silence, This moment of shared trauma, shared survival, shared determination to reclaim what had been stolen. When she finally pulled back, Margaret was there with tissues and a phone number. "Support group for program survivors," she said gently. "We meet every Thursday. You're not alone." The woman took the number like it was a lifeline. The rest of the event passed in a blur of book signings, conversations, people sharing their own stories of memory and trauma and the struggle to reclaim truth. By the time the bookstore closed, I was exhausted but lighter somehow. Like I'd shared the weight of carrying this story and found it more bearable distributed among many shoulders. Julian drove us home through Berkeley streets that had become familiar, comforting. The apartment we shared was modest. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, nothing like the expensive spaces we'd fled through during those desperate 48 hours. But it was ours, chosen freely, built on honesty. "You were amazing tonight," he said as we climbed the stairs. "The way you talked about memory, about forgiveness. Emma would have been proud." "You think so?" "I know so. She always said you had the gift of making complex things feel human, accessible." Tonight proved her right. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the couch. Julian settled beside me, his leg propped on the coffee table, his arm coming around my shoulders. "I've been thinking," I said into the comfortable silence, "about what comes next. The book is launched, the congressional hearings are over, Marcus Hall is in prison. What do we do now? We live." He said it simply. "We wake up in the morning and choose each other. We work jobs we find meaningful. We go on boring dinner dates and take walks by the bay and argue about whose turn it is to do dishes. We have a life, Asha. Not running, not fighting. Just living." That sounds too normal to be real. After everything we've been through, normal is revolutionary. I turned to look at him. "Do you ever regret it? Helping my father, exposing the program, everything that led to this. You lost your company, your reputation, 5 years of your life. You were shot, almost died twice. Was it worth it?" Julian was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he cupped my face with both hands, his scarred fingers gentle. "I regret that Emma died. I regret that your father was killed before he could see justice served. I regret every person who was hurt by the program and every survivor still struggling to recover their memories." He paused. "But I don't regret finding you. I don't regret keeping my promise. And I don't regret any choice that led to this moment right here, with you safe and whole and finally able to remember who you really are. I'm still figuring out who I really am. Then we'll figure it out together." He kissed me softly. "For as long as you'll have me." I thought about the photograph he still carried, the one from 5 years ago, showing a version of us I barely remembered. Thought about the woman in that image, smiling despite the impending danger, looking at Julian like he was an answer to a question she'd been asking her whole life. I still didn't remember that moment. Might never remember it fully. But I understood it now. Understood why that version of me had trusted him, fallen for him, chosen to fight alongside him. Because some things transcended memory. Some connections were deeper than neural pathways and consolidated experiences. Some recognition happened at a level that modification couldn't reach. "I'll have you," I said against his lips. "For however long normal lasts before something else tries to kill us." He laughed, the sound warm and alive. "Optimistic of you to assume something else will try. We survived a memory modification conspiracy. I think we can handle whatever comes next." Fair point. We sat there in our small apartment, 2 people who'd been ghosts learning to be human again. Outside, Berkeley hummed with its usual evening sounds, students calling to each other, cars passing, the distant rumble of BART trains. Normal civilian life. The kind of life we'd fought for. The kind of life we'd almost lost. The kind of life that felt precious precisely because we knew how easily it could be taken away. "Julian," I said into the comfortable silence. Tell me again. About the cafe, the photograph, what I was like before they modified me." He smiled, settling in for a story he'd told a dozen times but never grew tired of repeating. You were wearing your father's Stanford sweatshirt. The gray one you claimed was the only comfortable thing you owned. Emma had just finished explaining the weaponization protocols. And your father was talking about going to the media. You were quiet, processing everything. And then you looked at me and said, if we're going to burn their empire down, we should probably figure out what we're going to build in its place. Emma took the photo right after that. You looking determined, me looking surprised that you'd already jumped ahead to reconstruction instead of dwelling on destruction. I closed my eyes, trying to find that moment in my recovered memories. It wasn't there, not clearly. Just fragments, the cafe, the warmth of coffee, Emma's laugh, the feeling of purpose. But maybe that was enough. Maybe I didn't need perfect recall to understand who I'd been and who I was becoming. What did we build? Yes. In the end. Truth. Justice. A life that's ours instead of theirs. He pulled me closer. And each other. We built each other memory by memory, choice by choice. That's something no one can modify or take away. Pretty words for someone who claims not to be romantic. I contain multitudes. I laughed despite everything. Despite the losses and the trauma and the gaps in my memory that might never be filled. Because Julian was right, we'd survived. We'd won. And we were here, together, choosing to build instead of destroy. I love you, I said. The first time I'd said it. This version of me to this version of him. I don't remember falling in love with you 5 years ago. But I'm falling now, present tense, with full awareness of what I'm choosing. His expression softened into something unbearably tender. I love you too. Both versions, the one I lost and the one I found. You're the same person underneath all the modifications and recovery. You're still the woman who walks into fire to protect what matters. I'm done walking into fires. Good. Let's try walking into normal for a while. See how that fits. Deal. We sealed it with a kiss that tasted like coffee and hope, and the future unfolding one ordinary moment at a time. Outside, the world kept turning. Congress passed new laws. Survivors continued their recovery. Marcus Hall sat in prison with decades ahead of him. The memory modification program was dismantled, its architects prosecuted, its victims finally acknowledged. And in a small apartment in Berkeley, 2 people who'd been strangers and enemies and survivors and lovers sat together and chose to remember. Not everything. Some things were lost forever to modification and trauma and the simple passage of time. But the important things, love, truth, the determination to keep promises even when it cost everything, those persisted. Those couldn't be erased. Those were written too deep to be modified. I leaned against Julian's shoulder and thought about Emma. About how she'd walked into fire to save me, trusting that someday I'd remember enough to understand why. I understand now, I thought toward her ghost. I understand sacrifice and love and the choice to burn the world down if it means protecting what matters. You taught me that. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life honoring what you did. Somewhere in the space between memory and forgetting, I felt her approval. Somewhere in the silence underneath the city noise, I heard my father's voice. Be brave, Asha. Be brilliant. Be exactly who you were meant to be. And somewhere in the present moment, with Julian's heartbeat steady under my ear and the future spreading out ahead of us like a blank page waiting to be written, I felt something that might have been peace, or might have been forgiveness, or might have been the beginning of understanding that I could be both the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming, that I could hold contradictions, that I could be broken and whole simultaneously, that I could remember and forget and still be completely, authentically myself. The woman in the glass had finally come into focus. And she was exactly who she needed to be. Epilogue. 1 year later. The classroom was full of graduate students, future therapists, researchers, advocates who would shape how memory trauma was treated for the next generation. I stood at the front, a guest lecturer for Dr. Sarah Winters's Advanced Trauma Psychology seminar. My book sat on several students' desks, dog-eared and highlighted. Memory modification, I began, isn't just a cautionary tale about government overreach or pharmaceutical ethics. It's a fundamental question about identity. If our memories define us, what happens when they're rewritten? Do we become different people? Or do we remain ourselves at a deeper level that transcends experience? A student raised her hand. You wrote that you felt like a ghost for 5 years. Do you still feel that way? No. I feel real now, grounded in a life I chose rather than one that was chosen for me. But I remember the ghost feeling. I remember what it's like to live in a manufactured reality. Pause. And that memory, that authentic experience of falseness, that's what I try to help survivors recover. Not the original memories necessarily, but the awareness that they were modified. The understanding that their confusion and discomfort was valid, real. A sign that some part of them knew the truth even when they couldn't articulate it. How many people have you helped through recovery? Another student asked. 43 so far through the institute. But there are thousands more program survivors who need support, and not nearly enough therapists trained in this specific trauma. I looked around the classroom. That's why I'm here. To train the next generation of providers. To make sure that what happened to me, to Emma, to my father, it doesn't happen again. And if it does, we're ready to help people reclaim what was stolen. The lecture continued for another hour. Questions about technique, ethics, the difference between therapeutic memory processing and forced recovery. These students were hungry for knowledge, passionate about helping survivors. They gave me hope that the program's legacy would ultimately be positive, not in what it created, but in the response it provoked. After class, I walked across campus to meet Julian for lunch. He taught ethics courses now at the business school, using his experience with pharmaceutical corruption as a case study in what happens when profit motives override moral responsibility. We'd both found ways to turn trauma into teaching, to make meaning from horror, to ensure the dead weren't forgotten and the living weren't victimized again. He was waiting at our usual cafe, reading a newspaper with his cane propped against the table. When he saw me, he smiled, the kind of smile that still made my heart skip after a year together. How was lecture? He asked as I sat down. Good. The students asked smart questions. One of them is working on a thesis about memory consolidation in PTSD treatment. I think she's going to do important work. Takes one to train one. He pushed a coffee toward me. Oat milk latte, my preferred afternoon caffeine. I have news. The publisher wants a follow-up book. Specifically about recovery protocols for program survivors. They're offering enough that you could take a sabbatical, focus on writing full-time for a year. I considered it. A whole book about helping people reclaim modified memories. About building identity from fragments. About choosing who you want to be instead of accepting who others made you. I'll think about it, I said. Maybe co-author with you. Your perspective as someone who helped create the technology and then fought to destroy it. That's valuable. Our story, part 2. Our story continuing. I reached across the table, lacing my fingers through his. What do you think Emma would say if she could see us now? Julian smiled, that bittersweet expression he got whenever we talked about her. I think she'd say, I told you so about 800 times. Then she'd demand to know when we're getting married so she can haunt the ceremony. Who says we're getting married? The ring I've been carrying in my pocket for 2 months, waiting for the right moment to ask. He said it casually, but his eyes were serious. My breath caught. Julian, I'm not asking now. This isn't the moment. Too public, too casual. He squeezed my hand. But I'm letting you know it's coming. So you can think about what you want to answer. No pressure, no expectation. Just information. I looked at this man who'd died twice for me, who'd kept impossible promises, who'd spent a year helping me rebuild an identity from fragments and photographs and shared trauma. The answer is yes, I said. Whenever you ask officially, the answer is yes. His smile was incandescent. Good to know. We sat there in the cafe, holding hands across the table, planning a future that felt real and chosen and ours. And somewhere in the space between memory and hope, I felt Emma's presence. Not haunting, just present. Witnessing. Approving of this life built from the ashes of everything she'd sacrificed to protect. Thank you, I thought toward her ghost. For walking into fire. for making sure I survived, for trusting that someday I'd remember enough to understand why. The answer came not in words but in feeling, warmth, love, the sense of blessing. She died to save me, and I'd lived to honor what she'd saved. That was enough. That was everything. That was the confession the glass had been trying to show me all along. That love persists, that truth endures, that memory, even damaged and incomplete, can still build something beautiful, that we are more than what was done to us, that we are exactly who we choose to become. And I chose this, Julian recovery work, teaching, writing, a life that honored the dead while celebrating the living. Chose to remember. And in remembering I chose to hope. The end.